Feel like I was just here. Good morning. Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler today. News Talk 710 KNUS. Good to be with you. It is chilly outside, but you know what? It's not snowing, so I'm feeling quite all right. Good to be with you today and welcoming you to join the conversation as well. 303-696-1971. That is our telephone number. You can also text into the show on the 710 KNUS app on your smartphone. And a couple ways that you can reach out to me on social media directly. I'm at Sang Center. That's Sang with an E, not an A, Center on Twitter, as well as on Facebook at Jimmy Sengenberger Pro, or you can search Jimmy Sengenberger Media Personality on Facebook. Plus, a couple ways to email yours truly directly during and after the show. One, go to 710knus.com and go to the Jimmy Sengenberger Show page. Of course, I host the Jimmy Sengenberger Show every Saturday morning from 6 to 9 right here on 10 KNUS. Plus, you can email me via my website at the contact page there. That's jimmysengenberger.com. Keep in mind, there's no A, I, or U in Sengenberger. It's all E's all the time. Once you know that, Sengenberger is easy. So lots of ways to get in touch with me today. And of course, again, 303-696-1971, our telephone number. I appreciate the welcome from Alexa. Welcome back for round two, technically round three of fill-ins this week. Yes, round two because I filled in yesterday, but round three because it was both Deborah's show and Stefan's show that I did yesterday. So the trifecta is being complete today of all three shows in a row, and it's a pleasure and a privilege to be with you today. Thanks for being along for the ride. We've got a great show today. Some phenomenal guests, three powerhouse women will be joining us coming up in the next hour. My good friend Roshini Rajkumar, who is, gosh, I don't even know where to begin. She's the host of a podcast called The Crisis Files, really has a keen understanding of how to address communication and crises. In fact, is a coach on communication and crisis, and a really good one who's worked for high-level executives and more. And I always welcome her insights. We're going to talk about the insanity that is the Biden documents scandal, because it is a big deal, especially because the Biden administration has been so inept at how they have handled this. At least that's my belief. We will see what Roshini contends in that regard. She's also a licensed attorney, and she is the author of a book called Communicate That, Your Toolbox for a Powerful Presence. So Roshini is going to be up in the 7 o'clock hour. Then coming up in the 8 o'clock hour, we will be joined by Aurora City Councilwoman at large, Danielle Jurinsky. She just was awarded $3 million in court in a civil court decision from Robin Niceta. The $3 million is supposed to come from Robin Niceta, the former Arapahoe County Child Protective Services employee who was previously the girlfriend of former and then Chief of Police in Aurora, Vanessa Wilson. Now, Wilson was very much criticized by Jurinsky, including on this station, and Niceta apparently took after Jurinsky very viciously, accusing her of sexually assaulting her 2-year-old little boy. Niceta accused Jurinsky. And I mean, absolutely heinous. And this judge in the civil proceeding found that, yes, indeed, Niceta did that. And, you need to pay her $3 million. We're going to dive into that story with Danielle Jurinsky. There's lots to discuss there. And there's also something to be said about a candidate for Aurora City Council named Chris Rhodes, who had some disgusting things to say about this whole situation vis-a-vis Jurinsky. So Danielle Jurinsky coming up in the 8 o'clock hour. And then finally, Danielle DiMartino Booth will join us. If you watch the Fox Business Channel, she's frequently on there as an analyst of Federal Reserve policy, inflation, and more. She is the CEO and chief strategist for Quill Intelligence, LLC, and for 9 years was an insider at the Dallas Federal Reserve, the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. We're going to get her thoughts on what's going on with this impending meeting on February 1st of the Federal Open Market Committee. That would be the Fed's committee that decides whether or not they're going to raise interest rates again. What does it mean? What's the significance? We will dive in and get her thoughts and break it down in simple terms as well. She's an excellent guest, and I'm looking forward to talking with Danielle DiMartino Booth. So our three main guests coming on the program today: Roshini Rajkumar, Danielle Jurinsky, and Danielle DiMartino Booth. As we get rolling along, Jimmy Sengenberger filling in for George Brauchler right here on News Talk 710 KNUS. We really do have a great deal that is happening in the world today, and so much that we can really talk about on the program. And there's lots to discuss regarding, of course, the document situation. We're going to get a different perspective from Roshini Rajkumar on that, her unique perspective. But I want to begin with something that's strangleholding Colorado's service economy. Could, anyway, stranglehold Colorado's service economy, restaurants in particular that have been struggling to come back post-pandemic. They were put through the ringer because the all-knowing, all-powerful government swooped in and said, hey, we're going to shut you down over this thing called COVID. We're going to force you, in many cases, out of business. We're going to put these requirements for what you have to do in order to reopen your business, so on and so forth. We're putting you through the ringer. Now we're out of the pandemic, and we're going to keep it going. The Denver Gazette editorializing yesterday about what they call an assault on Colorado's service economy. News emerged last week of what could be the mother of all business-busting legislation, labeled Fair Workweek Employment Standards. Isn't that nice? The Fair Workweek Employment Standard. A measure soon to be introduced would dictate details of work schedules, pay, and other conditions for service workers across a broad swath of Colorado's economy. If adopted, the radical policy shift would make day-to-day operations nearly impossible for a host of businesses, even entire economic sectors that rely on flexible shift workers. And Colorado's restaurants would be among the hardest hit. In fact, almost every food and beverage establishment, alongside retail businesses of any kind, would have to dole out predictability pay to workers sent home early due to the slow business or other unforeseen circumstances. Now, this is absurd, and they put a pin on it in this editorial. That's right, an industry that by definition can't know in advance how many patrons will walk in the door on a given day or evening would have to pay workers for work they didn't do. They would have to pay workers for work they didn't do. Only another pandemic would be worse, they note. Here's specifically what this bill would require among its many dictates. It is absolutely outrageous. You want to talk about the all-knowing, all-powerful government coming in to micromanage an industry or multiple industries? Affected businesses would have to be told their work schedule affected employees would have to be told their work schedule 14 days in advance. Nearly impossible for much of the service industry. For example, my girlfriend's in the restaurant business, is a manager at a high-level restaurant in the Denver area. And she stressed that, look, it is impossible for us to just say 14 days out, oh, these are the people that are going to be working, and expect that we're going to need them definitively. And also that when we bring them in and we go through the day and then eventually we have need to send them home, we know that may happen. And you can't predict that. And if we have to cut them to send them home, then have to pay them still, how can you even function? How can you do that? Indeed, the next bullet point here, employees would have to be paid a full hour's wage for any time added to a shift, and 2 full hours wages for any time subtracted from a shift. So you have a day that you expect is going to be a little bit busier, but it's not, and you got to cut them. You got to send them home. You still have to pay them. And in fact, you have to pay them for 2 full hours wages that they didn't work. Or if you add time to the shift, then you got to do a paid full hours wage. Laying off workers or simply shutting down could, as the Gazette points out, be the result. And finally, overtime pay would be mandated for any hours an employee works within 12 hours of the last shift. Again, overtime pay would be mandated for any hours that an employee works within 12 hours of the last shift. What in the world is going on here? Talk about these micromanagement policies that the legislature is trying to bring down, and there's no reason for it. I want to bring Billy in on this conversation because, brother, I think when we look at an issue like this, businesses have been put through the ringer. They already have this paid medical and family leave program that has weeks and weeks, I think up to 12 weeks of paid family and medical leave that's required, that you might lose your employee for that period of time under law once it kicks in next year. You have discussions that are understandable. We can have about the minimum wage and some basic policies. Fair enough. There's going to be those kinds of discussions. But you put all these together and you put new things like this on top of businesses. How in the world are they supposed to survive, especially coming out of the pandemic hits?
This is a difficult one because I understand why the rules they're trying to, but I think they're misguided. And the thing is, the difficulty for me is I've spent time both managing inside of restaurants and also being the base employee inside of restaurants. And being that base employee, there sometimes are busy days, as you outlined, and sometimes slow days. But at the end of the week, that also can sometimes dramatically impact your weekly wages. That if I am the FNG, the newest guy there, and I'm scheduled for a 6-day run, and out of those days, 3 of those days were slow, so I get sent home early, I end up losing some of my potential income, and my landlord doesn't care, the utility company doesn't care, nor does the grocery store care. And I think that's where the genesis of this legislation started. I think that's their goal. Although I think it is ham-handed and inelegant. I don't think it will accomplish what it needs to. And I think it is overly punitive. But I understand what they're trying to do because I've been at the other end of that. And the problem, and the reason that I've got a little sensitivity for the restaurant worker is the reason being when you're on that end, not only are you at the bottom end, as you talked about it, on the income level, you're below minimum wage. So any cut of your tips or your ability to earn.
Well, it depends on what restaurant
larger.
you work at.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. But again, the fine dining establishments are fewer than the regular mom and pop and the franchises. So the people that are making the high end stuff, that's fantastic. And it's different. And because I know the amount of tips that you can get coming out of those fine dining areas. And that's fantastic. And they do a really good job because those people are really, really good. The dude that is serving you at Chili's, not so much. So I understand the difference in those, but I just think it's inelegant and wrong.
I agree that it's understandable what they're trying to go for. But when you're talking about 14 days in advance, that's 2 weeks. And then you have all of these requirements as far as the amount of money that you're supposed to pay. When you have decisions where you might be like, okay, we have a slow day that's going on, especially if it's a restaurant that has slow nights. And that can often happen in those more fine dining kind of establishments where it's like, okay, it's a time when, especially depending on location, et cetera. You're also talking about the entire state of Colorado. So there are various parts of the state that have significantly different influxes of people at various times of the year, so on and so forth. And to just expect that the businesses are going to be able to make these decisions is absolutely ludicrous. I mean, I think it's understandable exactly what you're saying as far as what happens for the everyday servers and bussers and so on and so forth, and what happens when they're told, oh, we don't need you today. But sometimes that isn't something that you can account for, and you can't just expect the businesses to make up the slack for that when it happens.
Yeah. You're absolutely right, and this is a difficult one for me because being on that worker side of it, I can see an advantage for if I get sent home early, that maybe the employer has to pay me for the remaining hour, or pay me for the remaining hour there and the next hour. I can see that from the employee side. However, I can also see it from the business side that, wait a minute, we are at a point in which I am going to make less revenue tonight, and I'm forced then to spend this additional revenue in order to send people home that are not working. And that to me is also something that I believe is a little untenable. So both sides I understand, but I also think that this is an inelegant solution. I don't think that they've gone about it right. And again, the 14-day rule, no, I can see 7 because many things can change inside of restaurants. And anybody that's managed restaurants knows things like sometimes you have parties that show up and it's like, oh, this place that we had canceled, now I need to set this thing up, and you've got 7 days. So having my hands constrained to not be able to take this revenue opportunity in my private dining room where I can make a premium and also bring in more workers, but I can't do it because I didn't have the stupid schedule out because I didn't anticipate this future event.
Even 7 days, like you consider a situation like you're a restaurant in Colorado and you have weather where you can't even accurately predict. Like I was saying on my show in this chair on Saturday morning, that the National Weather Service was giving a warning that we could have up to 8 to 12 inches of snow between Sunday and Tuesday. It didn't happen, but we've had times where it did, or where we're supposed to get a little bit and then you get a lot. And that's just one little example. I don't think the government should be coming in at all and mandating these kinds of things in a time period. I could maybe see at most, and I'm not supportive of this. I oppose it, but I could maybe at least see the requirement of if you have to leave early or something like that, then maybe you have an hour or two that's required as this law would provide. But I'll read a little text that came in from Alexa here. Predictability pay, complete BS and a destructive business model. I was a lifeguard for several years. There were times we had huge thunderstorms and closed the pool. Same with golf courses. They can't even predict weather 2 days out. Saturday morning, 121, the forecast out. Okay, this is exactly what I was saying. It was 8 to 12 inches of snow from Sunday evening to Tuesday. We had less than 1 inch. Love to see how the state and cities would go about predictability pay for snow plow drivers. I just don't see how this is tenable for businesses to plan. And I could see restaurants that normally don't make you sign up in advance, like days in advance, say, well, as a result of the new law, we cannot accept walk-in customers. We've only been able to plan out for our allotment that we can bring in the people and be able to afford them, especially if something happens and we got to let them go early, or we would normally might have to say, well, we're closing down.
Well, the restaurant should know over the course of, if they have at least 3 months in business, they have at least a snapshot of their dining patterns. So they should be able to predict, and that is part of the restaurant's manager's job.
That is not as tenable as you think. I have learned this. I didn't know this so much until I started dating my girlfriend and learning how these planning purposes can work and planning steps and methods work, and how you can make a lot of those predictions and pretty accurately, especially if your restaurant that's predominantly based on signups in advance. But
I have helped manage the restaurants and even country clubs, and you do have an idea.
But it's presumptive for the government to come in and tell them, hey, you got to do this.
You do know your slow days, and you do know your busy days.
So does that justify the government coming in and saying, we're going to expect this and down to the T?
But what I'm saying is it shouldn't be down to the T, but what I'm saying is the idea that the business can't predict it is a fallacy. They can predict it. I'm not saying that they are going to
an extent.
I'm not going to say they're going to be super accurate, but they're going to be only about as accurate as basically our weather forecaster. They have an idea of what is probably going to happen, and there are going to be pluses and minuses. And part of that is going to be sometimes, yes, you're going to be slow and you have to cut people back. The other part of that is sometimes you're busy and you have to call in extra people. And that's uncomfortable and difficult as well, or times in which someone is sick. And there are pushes and pulls on either side.
True, but Bill, again, we're talking about a mandate coming from the government that will expect that you are able to make 2 weeks out, or even a week out, as you're suggesting potentially, that you're able to make these kinds of judgments, and then you have to bear the costs that may come up. And especially when we are coming out of the pandemic, absolutely, that's a challenge for these businesses. It could be crushing.
I do, though, think that it is unrealistic to ask a workforce to not be able to plan 7 days out if you can't get me a schedule. And then the reason being behind that, and it's not a perfect analogy, but the issues we had recently with Southwest Airlines, that sometimes those people aren't getting their flight schedules until that day. And that creates an issue when
very different
things
industry.
Go back. I know, very different industry, but the issue is how far out people can plan and how far out they can staff things. And staffing by last minute is a recipe for disaster long term.
I don't think restaurants are as bad at that.
No, but the idea is that if I'm an employee and the restaurant cannot give me a work schedule for the next 7 days, I'm sorry, that is bad management. You should be able to predict that. Now, it's not set in stone, but if the management cannot predict staffing over the next 7 days with somewhat of an accuracy, they are bad at their job.
So then, Bill, would you think that a law that said, okay, you must provide a schedule to each employee that covers the next 7 days, but without these punitive measures of the additional costs and everything like that can add up and be indeed punitive, especially for an industry that is struggling right now coming out of the pandemic, that would be acceptable? That at least you have the requirement that you're supposed to provide a schedule within a week in advance, which I do think is reasonable. I think it's an unnecessary law, but I think that there could at least be a case to be made, the kind that you are making, that requires that without these additional expenses and things that the government's trying to.
I don't like the additional. I don't like the additional expenses at all, but I do like the idea of predictability. And what I would do is I would write, if I was going to be in charge of that law, I would say that, again, if you can demonstrate a pattern of behavior, so it would have to be a number of months in a row in which you can't get the 7 day work schedule. Then there are going to be punitive things you can do in court. There may be something where I can go in and I can get a percentage of my salary. I can do things like that if you're not delivering it to me. But I disagree with the aspect of these punitive hours. I think there may be something there. I just think is with lawmakers, they've done it ham-handed, and they've come in with a sledgehammer when it needs a scalpel.
So I could understand and at least accept that argument and that idea of 7 days in advance is required. And then after a period of time, you go through however many weeks or whatever, then you can go to a civil court and you can present a challenge and say, hey, I didn't have this. And as a result, here are the wages that I expect that I have lost.
Yep. Because also the marketplace also, if we had that rule, the marketplace also might be self-correcting.
Sure.
Because if I know I can go to John's barbecue and I can get my 7 day schedule, but I go over here and I go to Sam's barbecue and Sam's giving me 48 hours notice, then I'm going to go to John's. I think market can
that's much more reasonable, Bill.
Yeah.
I think This is one of the things I like, kind of working out live on the air, working out the issues of a particular proposal, because you might be able to find something that could at least be pretty sensible.
Yeah. And here's the stupid part about it is we had a bunch of grown ass adults that sat around and they had conversations like you and I are having, and they came to that solution.
I know.
And yet we wonder why nothing gets fixed. We wonder why stuff is still broken and why we get dumbass laws. Is because of this. This is the example. Jimmy and I are not rocket scientists, but we can figure out some reasonable
live on the
accommodations.
radio in 10 minutes of bringing you on.
Exactly. Yeah. But no, we get people that are actually paid to do this. And what do they come with? Dumbass solutions. That's your government in action.
Now,
folks.
that I can get on board with 110%. Bill Thorpe. Thanks, brother. 303-696-1971. What are your thoughts on this monstrous bill that's about to be introduced in the legislature? And on top of that, what do you make of the alternative proposal that Billy suggested? The whole idea of, well, okay, let's require 7 days notice, and then after a certain period of time, certain qualifications are met, if you will, then you can go to court and say, hey, these are damages that I should get. I'm owed this pay or what have you. I think much more sensible when you're actually making a lot of those arguments in court too. That's often the best way to suss these things out, as opposed to, well, we're going to have a law that demands automatically you're owed X, Y, and Z as a result of not meeting a particular law. Text coming in. Some small businesses are not that sophisticated to project the employee count / budget. Small businesses will go the way of the dodo. That's where perhaps you can have some exceptions. If we did what Billy's suggesting, you can have some exceptions that say businesses below this size, but even then it gets problematic. This bill, though, would absolutely be destructive to small mom and pop restaurants for sure. We are well overdue for a break, though. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, filling in for George Brauchler. What are your thoughts? Text in, call in, 303-696-1971. Keep it right here on Denver's local talk leader, News Talk 710 KNUS. 22 minutes before 7 o'clock, Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler this morning. News Talk 710 KNUS, talking about a bill set to be introduced in the Colorado legislature that it's absolutely ludicrous. Going at the service economy, it would require that Colorado restaurants, among other businesses, do the following. Affected employees would have to be told their work schedule 14 days in advance. As the Gazette notes in their editorial, nearly impossible for much of the service industry. Employees would have to be paid a full hour's wage for any time added to a shift and 2 full hours' wages for any time subtracted from a shift. Laying off workers or simply shutting down could be the result, they point out. Overtime pay would be mandated for any hours that an employee works within 12 hours of the last shift. This is absolutely stunning. And as one listener texts in, is this really something that's a problem? What really is the problem? And a problem that needs to be fixed, and I would add, needs to be fixed by the government, the all-knowing, all-powerful state of Colorado? Really? Nonsense. 303-696-1971 is our telephone number. Don in Colorado Springs, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. It's not easy being confused with a lot of Dons in the KNUS audience out
right,
there, you know?
Right? I know. We got a lot. Go ahead.
I mean, one thing that the reason why the Democrats thrive so much, and especially in the modern age, is the promise to take care of the workers, you know, and Peter Boyle's talked about it being fascism's sweet song. And this is just another, you're entitled to a living mentality, you know, 2 weeks, you know, I mean, you know, sucks to be you mentality. And all you're getting is just basically more work on the industry that cannot predict the future. Not even a weather forecaster can predict the future. It can only look at the the past and present trends, and all you're doing is going to kill another business for the sake of for the worker.
Is the idea here
who wants to be comfortable?
Are you suggesting here that this is just another example of the nanny state mentality? Let's take care of the workers from the government standpoint, and to hell with the businesses. They just have to comply.
That's how the worker thinks. Take care of me.
Well, I don't think that's necessarily how the worker thinks. That's how these government peeps, the legislators, the all-knowing, all-powerful authorities, how they approach it. Is our duty to provide, our duty to care for the workers.
Well, the government peeps, you know, they talk a good game, but in the long run, it's all about power. It's their love to abuse and shut down and destroy. I mean, this is the Marxist mentality in so many places that it's tried. They talk about rebuilding it, but they don't know how to rebuild it. They just destroy it.
Right. This is why you need a small and limited government, because the private sector knows how to accomplish those objectives. The government can only swoop in and tell you, expecting that they might know, or not caring whether they know or not. It's just and this often happens with environmental regulations on the oil and gas industry. We are just going to tell you what to do, and you're going to have to figure out how to do it come what may.
I mean, the only thing I can say as a last resort is to have that counter revolution against the Marxist revolution. Otherwise, just submit and watch your.
Well, I don't think it takes a revolution for us to push back. I think there are other ways to do it, including showing up and opposing a bill like this. But Don,
I agree. I agree with you. But I mean, ultimately, you know, the Republican Democrat paradigm. I mean, it is not working. And if we don't have more Republicans that stand up like they did weeks ago, I mean, there has to be another way to get redress. I mean, I'm not saying we should advocate for war, but I mean, that's a last resort.
Well,
But,
well,
I mean,
let's just go at this point, Don. Let's start with opposing a bill like this because this hasn't even been introduced.
And Billy had a good point. So I mean that's a good compromise.
Yeah. All right, Don. Hey, I appreciate the call. As always, 303-696-1971. This speaks of the business obligation to the employee. What of the employee obligation to the business, comes the text. Can they call in sick, request a day off inside that 2-week set schedule? Is there a penalty for poor service or bonus for good service? There's nothing more that reflects free market than service businesses. That is a great point. And when you talk about the idea of like within a 7-day time period, perhaps trying to reach some sort of compromise, what if you have an employee? Billy and I were talking about this during the break. What if you have an employee who ruptures his appendix or gets into a car accident or has a family emergency with their kid? What do you do? What are the implications on that business? Even in a compromise situation, where, say, you have all we're doing is you got to provide a schedule for 7 days in advance. And then if you don't, the employee over a period of time could demonstrate that in court and say, hey, I need damages. Well, then you need to, or I need back pay or what have you that I didn't get, I should have gotten, that I would have gotten if I'd been given schedule in advance, so on and so forth. Well, even then, you need to account for the ruptured appendix or the other spur of the moment issue that comes up with an employee. This kind of nanny state mentality is absolutely insane. Where can I find this story? I'd like to send it to a Democrat friend who owns restaurants. The Denver Gazette has an editorial, denvergazette.com. Go to the editorials page under opinion. It's entitled An Assault on Colorado's Service Economy, and it's from January 23rd, which is yesterday. That should be called, this bill should be called the No More Tip Bill. Okay, there you go. Absolutely. The ruling class, especially the left, desires to eliminate small businesses. Green energy, Obamacare, the government is at war with its citizens. It does seem like that, doesn't it? Especially in terms of the private sector and this presumptuous mentality and contemptuous mentality of those who are in power in government. This is the biggest reason why I am an advocate for limited government, getting government out of the way, because that kind of contempt from our elected officials and our unelected bureaucrats who believe that they can swoop in and, being all-knowing and all-powerful, can dictate to businesses and people how to operate and how to live their lives, that breeds worse and worse government. Because the minute those contemptuous officials are able to do things like this, is the minute they start deepening their contempt and micromanaging other aspects of your life, and you lose freedom, you lose liberty. And that is fundamentally what we have seen. And the Democrats are the prime examples of contempt for the average person and the average business. Because you can see about all the new taxes and fees and regulations and rules that have been put into effect under the guise of helping people or accomplishing certain objectives. And the squeeze that is being put on the people of Colorado and the businesses of Colorado is disastrous. And it is unacceptable, period. 303-696-1971. What are your thoughts? Please feel free to text in as well in the 710 KNUS app. Keep them coming and keep it right here. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger filling in for George Brauchler. We'll be back on Denver's local talk leader, News Talk 710 KNUS.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes. All in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today.
If you're in the legislature and you support this bill we've been talking about that's set to be introduced in the legislature that will gut service sector businesses, you absolutely should go. That's for darn sure. The conceit that we are seeing in the legislature holds no bounds. The contempt as well. My goodness. Jimmy Sengenberger filling in for George Brauchler this morning, right here on News Talk 710 KNUS. And in fact, I'm very excited. Oh my goodness. It's always a treat when you're filling in for someone and that person is able to join you on the program. George Brauchler is calling in. I think that's who we're talking with. George, good morning. Nope. Don't know why we're not hearing George.
Hello.
Hey, George, there you are.
Hey, Billy, if you guys are talking, I cannot hear you. I cannot hear you. No, I can hear you.
Okay. So we can hear George. He can't hear us.
I can hear it like we're in the booth and I'm hearing the audio come in over a speaker, not actually on the call.
Well, Billy, do we want to come back with George? All right, we're going to see what we can do and get him back on a little bit later here on the program. Again, Jimmy in for George Brauchler. We'll sort this thing out. Here we go. Text coming in. This is a stupid intervention of the government trying to fix problems by interrupting the invisible hand. Just like increasing the minimum wage to an inappropriate amount, predictability pay will increase the business's costs, which will increase prices, which will result in less customers/revenue, which will cause decreased staffing. Yes, you put it succinctly there. Without a doubt, it is the vicious cycle that the government will perpetuate. These people are idiots, the text continues. I like the texter pointing out this is very one-sided. Restaurants and other businesses have suffered a lot during the last 18 months with people just not showing up to work. Yes, exactly. In fact, that is not an uncommon thing where you have people, you hire a new employee and then they're a no-show. Or they don't end up coming in for their orientation day and don't even get started on their work. Or they just decide willy-nilly, well, I don't want to go to work today, so I'm not going to go to work today. And the businesses are just supposed to take it? You got this family program, the paid family and medical leave initiative that literally is just not going to be financially viable. It's not. The projections are already there. Up to 12 weeks of paid family and medical leave required under law starting next year. Businesses already have to endure that. And I say endure that because that is an extensive amount of time that you could be without an employee and then have to bring them back afterwards. Now, businesses should be able to make that decision and determine whether or not they're able to give such a long span of leave time. But why is the onus always on the business? Why is it always the business must be put in this position and basically have to care for people under the auspices of the government? Businesses should be treating their employees well, respectfully, paying them well, giving them benefits, doing things that will make them competitive as employers too. But they are not in the business of taking care of people like the left seems to think and the government mandates. Absolutely ludicrous and utterly and reprehensibly out of touch to boot. This bill is a monstrosity and must be defeated, to be sure. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, filling in for George Brauchler. Coming up in the next hour, communication and crisis coach, host of the Crisis Files, Roshini Rajkumar will join us. We'll take your calls as well, 303-696-1971, and we'll get George on soon. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler, News Talk 710 KNUS. 4 minutes after 7 o'clock, Jimmy Sengenberger here with you, filling in for George Brauchler, completing the trifecta after filling in for Deborah Flora and Stephen Tubbs yesterday. Now, this morning, 6 to 10 in for George Brauchler. And by the way, I'll be back in for Stephen from 4 until 7 tomorrow afternoon as well, right here on Denver's local talk leader, News Talk 710 KNUS. So Joe Biden, the president of the United States, says he has no regrets about what has gone on with his document scandal of all these classified documents that keep showing up at his home, various homes, at his office for a think tank associated with the University of Pennsylvania. And they go back as far as his U.S. Senate career. Here is something Biden said.
Back in November before the midterm.
Hang on, okay? Look, as we found a handful of documents were filed in the wrong place. We immediately turned them over to the archives of the Justice Department. We're fully cooperating, looking forward to getting this resolved quickly. I think you're going to find there's nothing there. I have no regrets. I'm following what the lawyers have told me they want me to do. It's exactly what we're doing. There's no there.
I have no regrets. There's no there. What does he mean by that? Well, Karine Jean-Pierre, White House press secretary, was asked about that.
Why doesn't he have regrets, given that classified documents keep turning up?
I talked about this last week. I'm not going to go beyond what the president said. Again, I would refer you to the White House counsel for anything further on this legal matter. Again, I spoke to this yesterday. Last Friday. I'm just not going to go beyond what the president.
That's not a legal question. It's about his
I
statement
understand.
from last week.
I understand, and I said I'm not going to go beyond what the president said. And I think it speaks for itself. I'm not going to go into what he meant or didn't meant. He laid it out. He said it to all of you when he was out, I believe, in California.
Oh, Karine Jean-Pierre and her non-answer answers. And Joe Manchin on the Sunday shows, the senator from West Virginia, well, he didn't take too kindly to, or at least didn't embrace this no regrets idea from Biden.
President Biden said he had no regrets in how he handled this. Do you have any advice for him on how he should handle this?
Oh, I think he should have a lot of regrets. Yeah, I would think that. I said, whoever's responsible. I mean, if I hold people accountable, and I use whether it be my chief of staff or my staff that we're doing this, and I'm looking at, then I'm going to hold someone accountable. But basically, the buck stops with me.
What are we to make of this? The way in which the Biden administration, their representatives have handled this. It seems inept. It seems incoherent. It seems like they are wanting you to we're constantly hearing the word seriously thrown out. Just take their word for it that they're taking this seriously. Meanwhile, new documents keep showing up and the timing's a mess. And it's hard to keep track of the timeline as well. What should we make of all this and how the Biden administration has been handling it from an optics standpoint and more? Let's talk about it with Roshini Rajkumar, who is someone I've been interviewing for years on issues of communications, crises, and more. She is the host of the Crisis Files podcast, a crisis strategist, and a licensed attorney based in Minneapolis, is the former host from 2012 to 2021 of Real Talk with Roshini on WCCO Radio in Minneapolis. Her book, Communicate That, is in its third edition. Her website, ownyourwow.com. Roshini Rajkumar joins me now. Good morning, Roshini. How are you?
Good morning, Jimmy. And, you've really got quite the energy doing all these shows. So it's great to be on with you in the morning.
You know what? It's just the microphone that does it. Afterwards, I'll probably crash and be like, all right, can I take my nap yet? I need that nap right about now. I think that's probably what's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's start with there's no there. When I hear that quote from anyone, let alone the president of the United States, it absolutely makes me think there's something there.
Right.
Let's keep digging. Reporters are asking the questions. Finally, they're asking the questions. and his press secretary, whose last name, by the way, I love how you pronounce, is not holding up well. She just isn't. I mean, it's her job to speak for the president. So I don't know what she's saying. Like, I'm not going to say anything separate from what the president said. So the problem here is on a couple of different levels. Certainly there are the legal angles that we can look at, but let's just even put that aside for a moment, even though it does seem Attorney General Garland is being very fair and is also saying nobody is treated differently. Now, that's how we should be in our country. That doesn't always play out, but that's at least Garland's line right now, and I like hearing that. So legal things aside, just the very fact that documents from as far back as your Senate career are in your private homes or other places that really aren't public buildings, that is very troubling. That should trouble all of us on many levels. The optics of it, the legality of it, just the politics of it. So there's that. It's just a terrible PR nightmare for Biden, for the Democrats, for the White House right now. And there is an argument to be made that the Democrats are letting this just fly and setting themselves up to find a new presidential candidate for 2024.
So one of the things that has been, and we'll get back to Merrick Garland here in a bit, because I want to maybe push back a little bit on something that you said in regards to the Attorney General. But one of the things that we keep hearing, a refrain from the administration, is that they take this seriously. The president takes this seriously. Karine Jean-Pierre consistently reinforces that narrative. Well, yesterday at her press conference, she was pressed to give any actual evidence that they take it seriously. And here's that.
When you and the White House and the president all say that the president takes these classified documents very seriously, without commenting on the ongoing legal issue, what would you point us to that would demonstrate that seriousness?
I'm going to really refer you to the White House counsel's office. I am. I'm going. I am.
So the president continues to say that he takes this seriously, and you can't demonstrate how he takes it seriously.
Let me just finish. Let me finish my answer. I'm gonna refer you to the White House counsel's office, and I'm gonna refer you to the statements that you've received from his personal lawyer. I'm going to refer you to the 45 minutes of conversation, of back and forth that my colleague has had with all of you last week. He's about to do another one where you can ask questions about this particular legal matter.
Karine Jean-Pierre just wants you to trust their word for them, Roshini Rajkumar, and that is, we take it seriously. We're not going to provide you evidence, but believe us when we tell you we take it seriously.
Well, and that, if you remember from our, maybe before you were born, the Gong Show, that would get a gong. That answer is just a bunch of crap, okay? If you're sitting in the position that she's sitting in, you cannot answer the National Press Corps, the White House Press Corps in that way. So, that's my first point on that. The rest of this is, so they go in with these different search warrants or, okay, we're opening up this space to the FBI. And more things are found than the FBI even went in to look for. So just at every layer of this. Now, to be fair, I was really thinking through some stuff. We're doing a big home renovation. We're going to be switching homes this summer. I've been thinking, do I know everything that's down in my storage room? No, but I sure as hell know it's all mine. It's not my neighbors. Right. It's not the governors of the state of Minnesota or Colorado. So these are the kinds of things that we should be asking the president's handlers, because obviously the president doesn't have very coherent answers. I am very troubled by his response. In fact, this is a case or a time for less is more. You've heard me say that, Jimmy. Less is more. And he just needs to stop talking about it. The other thing, as far as the press secretary goes, you and I have talked on your show in the past about body language, eye contact, all those subtextual images.
Yes.
Well, if your listeners get an opportunity to watch some of these press secretary remarks, how she hardly can keep eye contact with the reporters asking her questions. That's like, press secretary 101. You better look these people in the eye who are asking you these questions, have short, tight answers if you don't want to expand on things, but at least look them in the eye. And I'm not seeing a lot of that from her.
Again, we're talking with the host of the Crisis Files podcast, Roshini Rajkumar. I think it's not only is it revealing her body language and the lack of eye contact, but the language goes along with it, where she's struggling to find her footing what to actually say. And I want to give you one more example and ask you a broader question about the optics of this and what the American people are supposed to take away from it when they can't get clear-cut answers. And somehow we're supposed to believe almost that Biden is surprised by these documents turning up. Here's one more clip of Karine Jean-Pierre refusing to say if Biden knew that documents were there.
You just said the president said that he did not know the documents were there. I'm not actually sure he has said that clearly. Are you saying the president did
Well,
not
he
know
said he was surprised. He said he was surprised.
any of the documents?
He said he was surprised. I'm just going to leave it there, and I'm going to refer you to the White House counsel's office. I'm just repeating what he said, and he said
You just said. You said
he
he did not know
said
the documents were
he
there.
said he was surprised that the documents were there. He said that, and that he takes this very seriously. That's what I want to make sure that the American people understand. And I just refer.
American people might question that, given that you keep every few days it seems we are finding that more documents have been found at his house.
What I'm telling you is what the president has said, which is he takes this very seriously.
Very seriously, very seriously. He takes this very seriously. That's just the constant refrain. Yet, Roshini, they won't say if he knew the documents were there, only that he was surprised that these are turning up. And by the way, this isn't just Peter Doocy of Fox News pressing. We've got reporter after reporter after reporter who's just not buying this line.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's what the media should be doing. I was watching some of these press conferences live on the plane flying home from Florida last night, Jimmy, and I saw that clip that you just aired. I saw it, and I was very happy just as an ex-TV reporter myself. It doesn't matter the politics of who's in the White House. Reporters need to be asking these questions, need to be getting at the truth, digging up. Doesn't matter the party of the president. It is very incumbent on the media to do its job right now. And by the media, I definitely mean the journalistic press, those reporters that are asking these questions day in and day out. And guess what? It's not about being nice. It's not about making a press secretary or a president or his staff comfortable. It is about getting to the truth. And that is what I hope the journalists continue to do so we understand what exactly is happening here.
Yeah, and that's the thing is when you have these kinds of questions and you have the media pushing in these ways and then getting the kinds of responses, what message does that send? How would you assess the Biden administration's handling of this from a PR standpoint? Because it seems to be beyond botched to me.
Yeah, it is closer to the F range if we were going to go letter grade on this. I mean, you have to match up the reality, the perception. You have to not try to cover up. I mean, remember, often the cover up is worse than what actually you're being accused of or what actually happened. So don't try to cover anything up. But you sure as heck better know who's saying what on your behalf. And that's what I find is really at issue here. And I will say, I mean, I'm working with no one from the Biden administration. I think that press secretary needs my help because these responses are so Bush League. I mean, I think when I was in Fargo, small market television, I was experiencing better press secretaries that I was asking questions of at these kinds of press conferences. This is absolutely crazy what we're seeing and what we're hearing from the White House.
So what advice would you give them if they did bring you in, whether it was to talk with the president and or to talk with Karine Jean-Pierre? What would you advise them, Roshini Rajkumar?
You really like saying her last name, don't you?
It's how it's got to be said. That's it.
All right. Well, what I would say is, okay, look, a lot has already happened. We can't go back in time, but what we can do from this day forward is identify who's going to speak and on what topics. And if your line is counsel is the only one speaking, then she shouldn't be saying much at these press conferences. Maybe just a couple bullets that are consistent and don't change from day to day, and always refer to a specific counsel who's running the messaging on it. That is what I would recommend, or if they have another spokesperson that's more in tune to the legalities, that understands, because what we haven't really heard yet is why from the Senate time do we have these documents, these classified documents in your possession? That's what really doesn't make sense. I mean, I was even wondering why, when he was vice president, did these things, the timeline on that. So you've got to start really staying on point, whatever your message is. And, it should be the truth. I mean, the truth is always the best message, Jimmy. Let's just not forget that point. But stick with that and don't add a lot of tangents. Don't give them reason to question the veracity, to question your morality and ethics, to question your leadership. That's what we have right now. We really have a crisis of leadership in our country that, started long before even Biden came to the White House. And it's just going to continue as long as this administration is embroiled with this crisis.
Roshini Rajkumar, our guest, again, host of the Crisis Files. Follow her on Twitter at The Crisis Files for the program. Let's talk about Merrick Garland for a moment, because you said he's being very fair and he's right to be talking about how nobody should be treated differently. However, let's go back to November of last year. November 2nd, these documents showed up first at the University of Pennsylvania. And then later that month, you had the DOJ launch its sort of investigation into Biden. But they made a big stink and let public and everything about Trump and the Trump documents. And you had the special counsel that was appointed to oversee Trump in no time after that, back in November. And we didn't hear about this until, 2-3 weeks ago for the very first time, when it was it CBS News or whichever media outlet reported on the Biden classified documents first, months after those original documents. And then a special counsel is appointed to oversee the investigation of the president of the United States, aka Merrick Garland's boss. So there have been those who've wondered, okay, why was there a multi-month period, 2 months or so plus, where you had the Biden Justice Department keep hush on that while the Trump story was out front and center. And then finally the word gets out, and then he goes ahead and appoints a special counsel. I think that there's some cause, at least, for folks to question a little bit about how fair Merrick Garland really has been here. Is there not?
Well, the simple answer is the midterm elections. Okay.
Of course.
Now, the question for me, for all of us, is, did Merrick Garland and the Justice Department know about these documents before President Biden? I would like to believe that Biden and his actual people in the White House knew before anybody else, anyone from the Justice Department, any American citizen. That's where you need to point the finger on the timing. So if they knew, and I have a strong feeling they did, they withheld those documents in order to have the best case scenario for the midterm elections. Then however they came out, that's the $1 million question. Who actually leaked that or got word of that out there? That's what I'm a little unclear on. And that's then when Merrick Garland steps in. And yeah, perhaps, as you described, he may not have been as consistent, but now hopefully he's correcting the score. You cannot treat this any differently. In fact, you have to have as much scrutiny because Biden is a sitting president. You have to have as much scrutiny as you did for Donald Trump.
My understanding is the documents were found miraculously on the November 2nd and then provided to the National Archives, which within 24 hours, which then immediately reached out to the Justice Department and said, hey, we've got these documents. And in November, the DOJ launched its investigation. And it's hard for me to fathom that Merrick Garland, as the Attorney General, did not know that this was happening regarding the president of the United States. But some of these questions will hopefully be sussed out. And yeah, hopefully he will be fair moving forward. But I do wonder about the 2+ months in the interim between the discovery of those documents and the reporting from the archives to the Justice Department, and when that special counsel, Robert Hur, was appointed a couple weeks ago by the Attorney General to look into this matter. But I want to shift gears to another topic, and I so appreciate your insights there. But while I still have you, because we're getting tight on our time, I had to ask you. I spent some time talking about this yesterday when I filled in for Deborah and Stefan. But Roshini, my heart breaks because M&M's has put their spokes candies on ice in the freezer, saying, look, things are a little bit too hot as far as the controversies regarding our spokes candies and some of the backlash against the woke stuff, at least the perception of woke mentalities being incorporated into their animated candies, that Maya Rudolph is going to step in and be the spokesperson instead of the spokes candies, who again are being swept aside because it's too controversial for the M&Ms. What do you make of this as a PR professional?
Jimmy, this is a dark day for America.
I know.
I'm not even saying this to laugh about this. How crazy have we become that those little spokes candies are getting literally canceled? I mean, that's what's happening. And these are the cutest little things. I think they have cross-generational appeal. They tie M&M's back history and legacy into the future, modernizing the brand. I am so confused by this. It's a bad decision. And guess what? Not everyone's going to love Maya Rudolph either. So then we're going to have another layer to this. Well, I'm really disappointed.
Is this a story of a candy, innocuous, loved by everybody, M&Ms, getting too political and then facing blowback for that? And then they say, well, okay, we kind of got to step back here dramatically to the extreme and just get rid of what the source of the controversy is and hope it dies down. Is this a lesson for companies about playing politics or bringing cultural issues into their candies or other innocuous products?
Yeah, look, there are times when you can make these very pronounced statements. For example, if the Confederate flag is hanging prominently in a building, that we can come up with a bunch of reasons why that is going to be offensive to some people and should be taken down. I want to end our time together by pointing out that the contrast to this M&M. The lesson here, and my advice as a crisis strategist, is leaders need to stand up for their brands. They need to stand up and say to the public, hey, this is what we're standing for. We're having fun with this. We can certainly change up some messaging, but we're not going to completely throw out all those little spokes M&Ms. Let me just end with this positive note. This morning in the Wall Street Journal, I'm reading about Spotify and how Spotify has to lay off 6% of its workforce. Apparently last year, the CEO said, we are not going to lay people off. We're going to do everything we can to not do that. He has to walk that back. But guess what he said? He was quoted as saying, look, where we're at is on me. I will take full responsibility for what's happening. We're going to try to make this as painless as possible. But at the end of the day, when you lay off this many people, it's difficult. What if more leaders of our country, of all of our businesses, would stand up like that and say, the buck stops with me?
Right.
I think we'd be in a better place, Jimmy.
And that includes the president of the United States when it comes to something like the documents that we have seen. I'll just throw that out there. I know you wanted to end on that note, but I just want to ask you one final thing. There's speculation that this is actually a publicity stunt for M&M's in advance of the Super Bowl, and maybe they'll have some sort of grand return in a couple weeks, I think on February 12th, when the Super Bowl happens, and they will herald the return or the brand new spokes candies or something. If so, how do you think that plays?
Well, that's a little sketchy. I don't know that I could call that amazing PR, because if they were axed for a reason that really had meaning and value to people, even if you and I find it ridiculous that they were axed, if you bring them back in some full glory, right, then you're also kind of, poking fun at really actually sensationalizing some beliefs that many of your customers hold dear. So that's questionable, but an interesting thing to watch for and maybe talk about.
Roshini Rajkumar, host of the Crisis Files podcast. Where can folks go to listen to the podcast, Roshini?
Well, please go to anywhere you listen to podcasts, The Crisis Files. Just search for that. It pops right up. You can also go to thecrisisfiles.com, and we hope you follow us at The Crisis Files on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube.
Wonderful. Roshini, always great to check in with you, my friend. Thanks so much for sharing your insights today.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Once again, Roshini Rajkumar joining us here on the program. Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler. She's always excellent on the radio, and enjoy getting her perspectives as a longtime crisis coach and PR professional. We're going to take a break. We'll pick up the conversation on the other side. What do you make of this discussion that we had? Any reactions to Roshini's observations? How about Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, and how he handled this thing from the start regarding the documents? Maybe you're upset about the loss of the spokes candies for M&Ms being put on ice way back in the freezer and being replaced by Maya Rudolph. Who knows what your thoughts are? I don't, but I'd like to hear them. 303-696-1971. You can also text into the show on the 710 KNUS app on your smartphone. Keep it right here. Jimmy and for George on Denver's local talk leader, News Talk 710 KNUS. Rocking and rolling back. Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler. News Talk 710 KNUS. It would be interesting to know, writes in a texter on the 710 KNUS app on his or her smartphone. It would be interesting to know how much Hershey already felt the backlash by going woke like Coke and Disney et al. With massive revenue drops. So I do want to clarify, when we're talking about M&Ms, that's Mars. Mars Inc. owns M&Ms, not Hershey. But your point is well taken, and it's a legit question to ask. That is to say, are they recognizing that maybe they shouldn't, that go woke, go broke is true, and they shouldn't have done this? I don't know. I certainly think it's an example of the lack of wisdom in getting involved in politics when you are an innocuous company like Mars with your M&M's candies, and then you're saying, oh, well, things are too hot in the kitchen, so we are going to put our spokes candies on ice in the freezer and replace them with a human spokesperson. Huh. Go figure. Also, our telephone number, 303-696-1971. If you want to join in to the festivities, the big question, how has the Biden team handled the chaos over these classified documents? How inept have they handled this, perhaps, might be the better question. Real Clear Politics, Phil Wegman on Fox broke this down, I think, very succinctly and effectively.
And the White House response to all of this continues to be to refer reporters to the White House counsel's office. Right. And their response, when you ask very particular questions about how did they get to the Biden Penn Center or the president's garage or the room adjacent to the president's garage, they tell you, well, there's an ongoing investigation, and they don't provide any of those details. I think that eventually, at some point, we will get answers as to how these classified documents that were supposed to be handled very carefully, that if you and I saw them, we would be in a lot of trouble. I think eventually we will get answers there. But the White House argument has always been that the president takes classified documents very seriously. Just today, I asked the White House press secretary, without getting into any of the legalese around those investigations, can you demonstrate how he does take these documents seriously? And again, she referred me to the White House counsel without giving an answer.
Great summation from Phil Wegman of how the Biden team, Karine Jean-Pierre and the others, have just utterly failed to handle this well, to even answer basic questions. I mean, here's one example. Over on MSNBC yesterday morning on Morning Joe's show, on the Morning Joe show, even they weren't buying another spokesperson, Biden advisor Ian Sam's defense of things.
Look, the president takes this very seriously, as you heard him say
There's that phrase
multiple
again,
times in the
very
last
seriously.
week. And, I understand the question about how this happened. Yeah. And I think it's really important to understand that's exactly the type of thing a Justice Department investigation would be looking at. And so when you appropriately believe in the independence of a Justice Department to be able to conduct investigations free from undue influence and interference, that this president has committed going all the way back to the campaign, that is why we're deferring to the Justice Department to answer some of these questions. They're going to be tasked with finding all the facts, putting it all together, understanding exactly what happened, asking the questions. That's appropriate. That's why we're fully cooperating, to understand how this happened. And the president is giving them access to what they need to answer.
Doesn't the president know, does the DOJ need to tell the president why the president has classified documents in his home? I don't understand that.
Well, Joe, I understand the question, and I think that it's really just gets to the heart of the matter. The DOJ is the one who's tasked with finding out all the facts here, and the DOJ is going to ask questions, and the DOJ is going to seek information, and we're being fully cooperative with that process. We hope that that process moves forward thoroughly and efficiently so that we can get all the answers out there.
Yeah, they're not handling this well, which is why you get 64% of Americans agreeing that Biden hasn't handled this well.
Our most recent ABC News Ipsos poll says 64% of those in the latest poll, and that was before this latest discovery, believed he acted inappropriately.
64% believe Biden acted inappropriately with these documents. And that should not come as a surprise whatsoever. Text just came in. Jimmy, the Democrats lit the fire that burned their own forest down. It does sort of seem like that is happening here, doesn't it? Another text coming in. What about the peanuts? In reference to M&Ms, you did see Mr. Peanut murdered on January 22nd, 2020. Heading into the Super Bowl ads when didn't they birth a new peanut or something in their ad for the Super Bowl? Yeah, they played games there. Maybe M&M's is doing the same thing. Who knows? We'll find out on Super Bowl Sunday, February 12th. But time will tell at that point. Going back to the first hour, we talked about, I got a text I've been wanting to read. We talked about this bill in the Colorado legislature that really is, as the Denver Gazette editorialized, an assault on Colorado's service economy, where they have all sorts of new requirements that legislators would like to force upon restaurants and other service businesses. That includes requiring that affected employees must be told their work schedule 14 days in advance. Employees would have to be paid a full hour's wage for any time added to a shift and 2 full hours' wages for any time subtracted from a shift. And overtime pay would be mandated for any hours an employee works within 12 hours of the last shift. And they're calling this predictability pay. And here's a text that came in from a listener. Terry in Texas. You can't schedule someone, allowing them to make a budget, and then arbitrarily take hours away from that employee and say you run a fair and good business. If you expect much from your employees, you need to match that commitment as an employer. So, Terry, I certainly agree, and I hope you're still listening. I certainly agree that employers have an obligation to treat their employees in the way that they want their employees to act. Mutually beneficial exchanges are the nature of economic exchanges or interactions, transactions, and business relationships, and especially when it comes to an employer and an employee. That's absolutely a given in my book. But that does not mean two things. Number one, that the all-knowing, all-powerful government must step in and force businesses to do something that they claim or are implying is not being done well enough. And I don't see the evidence that this isn't being done well enough, that this is necessary, this kind of an approach. So you're impugning businesses by doing this and micromanaging them on the one hand. So that's number one. Number two, sometimes when you are looking at an industry like the restaurant, you have no choice, and it's part of the nature of the business. And employees know and expect and should know and expect some of the volatility that can come from restaurants. I'm aware of restaurants that have no choice, and they're like, look, this is a slow season. We're not going to have as many hours available. Or this is a slow night and we have no choice but to leave early. You know, you really have a lot that needs to be considered here. So I'm noted, I didn't notice that there was a text before this one, and the listener, thanks for listening, texted and added in, please read the text before that. So I shall indeed. There needs to be regulation to rein in businesses and protect workers. If you deny that, you are not smart enough to participate in the conversation. I deny that. I guess I'm not smart enough. But thank you for listening anyway. Businesses constantly screw employees. That is a given in the economy. But does that mean that the government is the answer? Well, you do continue to answer it this way. The government answer is wrong, no question. But it is a response to a modern management theories that never affect the business bottom line, but create havoc and hardship for the good, dedicated employees. I don't think you can make that judgment, certainly not categorically. Businesses are different. Every business is different in how they, even franchises are different in many cases between various franchise locations. But broadly speaking, businesses are different. And even if you're now saying the government answer is wrong, but you're also impugning all businesses categorically, I can't get on board with that. And you do contradict yourself by saying there needs to be regulation to rein in businesses to protect workers. And then you say the government answer is wrong. Literally, government answer is implied in regulation. Is it not? Another text coming in from a different listener. You just don't let people leave early anymore. If you're expected to pay, then they can expect not to leave early. Well, I don't think that can be the case. I mean, it varies. You have to depend on the circumstances of the business and what they're dealing with. And you can only predict so much out into the future, even in that day. 303-696-1971 is our telephone number. If you'd like to join into the festivities, we'd be happy to have you converse on the air, especially if you are disagreeing via text. Why not call in and engage in the conversation live on the air? You are more than welcome to do so. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, filling in for George Brauchler. Keep them coming on the 710 KNUS app or call in again, 303-696-1971. You're listening to Denver's local talk leader, News Talk 710 KNUS. Welcome back. Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler this morning. Guess we're continuing on the topic of the first hour, this bill. And I'm going to, try and find out who the sponsors of this to-be-introduced legislation are or will be. It has not been introduced yet in the legislature, but putting new restrictions on businesses as far as scheduling workers and minimum payments and so forth. The Colorado Chamber of Commerce president, Lauren Furman, put it into this perspective this way, quote, "The proposal fails to recognize the basic operational needs of businesses, and we're concerned about the impact it will have on our economic climate and competitiveness. It would impose broad new regulations and restrictions on how employers manage scheduling practices, placing unnecessary and often unfeasible burdens on both businesses and workers." Now, in the last segment, I put out the call for anybody who is texting in. Feel free to call in as well. It looks like one of those texters, Gina in Aurora, has called in. Good morning, Gina. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
What's on your mind?
Well, I just kind of wanted to clarify. If I schedule an employee to work, say, the lunch rush, and I schedule them for 6 hours, and that lunch rush is only 4 hours, I'm going to keep them there those 2 hours, and I don't care if they're washing walls. If I have to pay them, I'm going to have them work. Does that mean that, say they have a sick kid, does that mean I'm protected if I tell them, hey, you can't leave? Like, there's just repercussions with this bill all around.
So you're looking at some of the complicating factors here.
Yeah.
So I think, and it works both ways, right? So it works both ways where, okay, I need to leave early. Well, okay, the business should be understanding of that. Your kid is sick or something happened in school or what have you. The business that you're working for should be understanding, but then, and have that flexibility to let you go. But that business then also needs to have flexibility in turn.
Exactly.
Yeah. No,
I get it. I worked in the service industry. My daughter works in the service industry. If that was my main source of income and I'm only getting my shifts, like a week at a time, it is frustrating. Also, I don't like that they call you up, hey, we don't need you today, or we don't need you, or they switch the schedule on you.
Right.
During the week. You're like, oh yeah, I made my whole life schedule around what you told me I'm going to work, and then they come back and, oh no, we had to make changes. That's frustrating.
I can understand that completely. The frustration is palpable and it is very real, especially when your life, literally your livelihood, and therefore your life depends upon your schedule and your ability to make the money, etc. But to box businesses in legally is a different story. And, maybe there is, and we were trying, Billy and I, earlier in the show, to reach some sort of common ground on this, or some sort of a midpoint but even then it gets very dicey. Gina, I'm up against the break, but I appreciate you calling in and clarifying. Thank you so much. Again, 303-696-1971, our telephone number. Maybe Danielle Jurinsky has a thought on this. She's a business owner of multiple restaurants. She's Aurora City Councilwoman at large. We'll talk in the next segment, top of the hour, about the $3 million award that she's been given in court against Robin Nicetta of Aurora Arapahoe Child Protective Services. Keep it right here. Jimmy and for George. Stay with us. Third hour. We're just about 5 minutes after 8 o'clock. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, filling in for George Brauchler today. Looks like we're going to have a high of 31 degrees with fog throughout the day, although it looks pretty decent out right now. Good to be with you today on News Talk 710 KNUS. You know, it's always fun when you line up guests and unexpectedly you end up with back-to-back Danielles, which is exactly what's happening this morning. We will have Danielle DiMartino Booth, who is a longtime former employee of the Dallas Federal Reserve. We'll talk with her in the next hour. But this hour, we have Colorado's own Danielle Jurinsky, who is City Councilwoman at large in Aurora. And we've got lots to talk about. She joins me now. Good morning, Danielle. How the heck are you?
Good morning, Jimmy. I'm great.
It's good to have you on. I've been wanting to talk with you ever since Friday's news that was big about this decision in the civil case that you had brought against Robin Niceta, the now former Arapahoe County Child Protective Services employee who, well, she did the unthinkable and reported you for having, she accused, although anonymously at the time, sexually assaulting your little boy. And it was heart-wrenching. You've talked about this for a while now, several months, about how that was and how horrible it was putting you through this. And you got a $3 million award. Niceta didn't even respond to this case. And also Niceta is facing legal charges. First of all, congratulations on the civil win. I mean, it is horrendous what you've been through. And I know everybody here at KNUS supports you and feels for you. I don't know where you want to begin here. Maybe we can recap the facts of what happened, but how are you feeling? What's going on through your mind?
Well, I feel good, Jimmy. You know, this damages award is a step in the right direction. I, of course, will probably never see much, if anything, from Robin Niceta, but the hope is that this judge sent a very clear message. And what she wrote in her ruling was so thoughtful, and it was just so well stated that I'm just hoping that the judges involved in my civil case against the county and then my criminal case against Robin, I'm hoping both of those judges really take heed to this. And I'm hoping that this, $3 million amount is so shocking enough that it sends a message.
Now, for those who don't recall or don't know, Robin Niceta, at the time that she placed this anonymous call into Child Protective Services accusing you of the unthinkable, her girlfriend was then police chief of Aurora, Vanessa Wilson, who, of course, you were very critical of, and rightly so, I would add, at the time. And so this appears to have been in retribution for your criticisms of Vanessa Wilson. Just to give folks a little bit of background. Now, the judge in this ruling saying $3 million damages award is given to Danielle Jurinsky said the following in part in this eloquent decision that you were alluding to just a moment ago. The court finds that the conduct was especially egregious since it was done by a person tasked with protecting children and knew full well that her false report would result in an investigation and potential separation of a young, vulnerable child and a parent with unknown potential harm to that child. And the judge further noted that this type of conduct, quote, cannot and should not be tolerated by anybody, Danielle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm so thankful to that judge, Judge Elizabeth B.B. Voles. I will be looking for her name on a ballot and we'll be trying to garner support for her. We always talk about vote all judges out, but you know what? This is pretty eye-opening. pretty eye-opening. And so I am thankful, and, I hope to move onwards to the criminal trial and then my civil case with Arapahoe County. And remember, my civil case with Arapahoe County involves a whole lot of other people. This isn't just about me anymore, Jimmy.
Right.
And I've become the voice for so many people. So I'm really looking forward to those outcomes.
I want to talk in just a moment about that civil case against Arapahoe County, but I want to mention one other thing that happened back in the fall of last year. Reading from the Denver Gazette in September, a state audit concluded Robin Nicetta's child protective work for the Arapahoe County Department of Human Services failed to follow state regulations and had deficient investigative practices. The audit recommended further investigation into the county's oversight and supervision of its child protective staff, which does lead into your broader lawsuit. And they note that 7 complaints about Nicetta's performance and conduct have been referred for additional criminal investigation, according to the audit summary. So here you have a state audit even saying that at a minimum, she didn't follow, Robin Nicetta did not follow state regulations, and her investigative practices were deficient.
Yeah, I mean, it's really something, and even with that coming out, that report from the State Department of Human Services, even with that report coming out, Jimmy, it has been crickets from the county. Michelle Dossi is still the supervisor. She is still the supervisor, which just blows my mind. And the county is playing all these games. They, continue to file motions to dismiss. In my civil case, it's like the state just concluded all of these errors. I think there was 13 line items of missteps and oversights with their processes, and also with Robin Nicetta herself. I mean, Jimmy, you can't make this up. And until real change happens, I promise you, Jimmy, you, me, it doesn't matter who it is. You are only one phone call away, one false allegation away from losing your child with this current system, with no proof, and really no way to defend yourself. I can't tell you how many people I've met, with this class action lawsuit now, how many people have come forward and their children have been taken, and then they're placed under a gag order. So they're not even allowed to talk about it. I mean, it's sickening. It's sickening. And more people, Jimmy, this is legalized kidnapping in the United States of America. That's what this is. That's what this is. It is such a weaponized system. 2 people going through a divorce, a custody battle's involved. One makes an allegation against the other. It's over. Now that other person might end up winning it $20,000 later in attorney fees and not having seen their child for 3 to 6 months while they battle these false allegations. But you are guilty until proven innocent, period, in this system. And until there is real change, real systemic change, I'm not going to stop, and I'm going to keep beating this drum until others continue to stand alongside me, and the voice gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Danielle Jurinsky, our guest, she is Aurora City Councilwoman at large. And just to clarify, when you mentioned the number 13, as the Denver Gazette reported back in September, the audit that they did, the state audit, determined that Nicetta had conducted 196 intake assessments or investigations and 73 child permanency cases during her 5-year tenure with the county. Of those, 13 had to be sent to another county for reassessment because it could not be determined if the original safety concerns identified by Nicetta had been mitigated. Now that is striking, and I think there's more than enough justification for this broader lawsuit, the federal lawsuit, which is seeking $50 million in damages with the number of families participating. So you've got that, and you've got the criminal proceedings for Robin Nicetta still ahead. But this shows just how important it is to have watchdogs and to have accountability on these agencies that have so much power, Danielle, which is why sometimes it does require legal action when the county is failing to hold their own employees to account. And I do have to say that in Arapahoe County, the 5 county commissioners are responsible directly for the county.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know, they've all taken up positions of defense naturally, right? So they've just become very defensive. Nothing to see here. Nothing wrong over here. You know, they may Nancy Jackson put out a statement. She wrote an article to the Gazette 1 week prior to that state report coming out that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
She wrote an article into the Gazette, basically stating, we've done nothing wrong. You know, Necedah is an isolated incident. Our organization is wonderful. This is being way overblown, yada, yada. A week later, this report comes down from the State Department of Human Services.
Mm.
I mean, they're in total panic mode. They're trying to cover it up. And what are they trying to cover up? These are children, Jimmy. To these commissioners, there's nothing to cover up. You need to own it. And you need to help me return these children. You need to help me fix the process. Furthermore, help me. You should be trailblazing it and asking me what's wrong with the system, having now gone through it. But they're not, Jimmy. They're hiding. They're passing the buck. They're still trying to tell people that there's nothing wrong in their organization.
Well, yeah. And as an Arapahoe County resident, I am deeply disappointed, and I'm glad that you and others are joining together for accountability through the legal system. We did get a couple of texts. One simple amen, and another horrifying story. Now, I want to amplify this with the response from some different people. So there are Democratic Socialists, others. There are a couple who are on the board, or rather on the city council of Aurora, a couple of colleagues of yours, and they want to amplify their numbers. So there is another Democratic Socialist running to be on the city council who named Chris Rhodes, who tweeted a series of tweets, among them saying the following in regards to your damages award of $3 million that the judge in a great ruling, a very well-articulated, powerful ruling, said, okay, this needs to go to Danielle Jurinsky from Robin Necedah. And Chris Rhodes tweeted in part, quote, damages like this are supposed to be based on lost wages or earning potential. It didn't affect either for her. Also, why are we holding social workers to higher standards than politicians? Danielle Jurinsky and many politicians say slanderous things about people with impunity. How did you take that, given how much you endured and what they tried to do, Robin Necedah, that is not they, Robin Necedah, tried to do to you and your, at the time, 2-year-old little boy?
Well, you left out his best tweet, and it was paraphrasing something along the lines of, what is wrong with our judicial system when a rich woman is awarded millions of dollars? You know, here's what I will say about all of this, and my colleague Dustin Zvonek pointed it out perfectly. You know, Chris Rhodes has a lot to learn, especially if, you know, he's running for office now. And if he's going to hold office, he has a lot to learn. There is a big difference between like the mudslinging that comes along with politics, you know, mean words. There's a big difference between mean words and someone misusing and abusing their power of authority to remove a child from a parent.
Yeah.
There is a big difference. And I think that Chris Rhodes got a big dose of that reality. I will say that he did call me. And it was one of the more humbling apologies I have ever received, Jimmy. I have to tell you, in all honesty. And I think it really hit him. He admitted that he hadn't read any of the articles. And I explained to him how this damages award works, and that most likely I will not see a fraction of anything of $3 million from Robin Necedah. He admitted to all of that. It was very humbling. I got to express to him how passionate this really is, how many people are really involved in this, and how deep this goes. And he said something, Jimmy, that really, I think, hit he and I at the same time. He said, Danielle, I just had my first child last May. And I think that's when he ate a big piece of humble pie and realized this could be him too. You know, this could be him too. This could be anybody.
So I'm very glad you had that conversation and that you're able to share that with us, that there was a better turnaround to that story. I guess what this could be, in a sense, is in many respects an indictment of the way politics is today, that it is so divisive, where the first response is to say, what's wrong with the judicial system? This is ridiculous. A rich woman, and this doesn't make sense because it's not like that she lost any income, so on and so forth. And I think that to have that kind of knee-jerk reaction just shows where we are at. And then if we can actually have discussions and conversations as real people, at a minimum, that can help. It may not work out the issues that we have politically. I mean, there's going to be a lot of daylight between you and the Democratic Socialists. That's for darn sure. But at least if we can agree on common decency in treating people with dignity and respect, that's a start.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was very eye-opening for him. And like I say, even with his apology, it's by no means an endorsement at all. I told him, I said to him, Chris, I'm sure you and I will have plenty of other things to battle about, probably everything that has to do with politics. I said, this issue, first of all, it's nonpartisan. This issue with human services isn't a Republican issue. This isn't a Democrat issue. It's a nonpartisan issue. And it was, when I first read those messages, I was like, wow, I don't know this guy, but, and it shows, Jimmy, kind of what you were talking about. It shows, a guy decides to run for office, anybody decides to run, and he thinks that the correct approach is to jump in and immediately start attacking. I mean, that's where we're at in politics today. That's where we're at.
Danielle Jurinsky, our guest. I want to read one listener text and then ask you about this and get your response. And then I want to ask you about this bill regarding restaurants that we've been talking about. Jimmy, 30 years of working in the nursing field. I work for the county and private agencies. I can tell you that keeping children in the system is job security for these people. They do a lot of things for job security. That is a major, major problem. They need to do a complete gutting of the social services department in human services.
Amen. Whoever sent that comment in, you are spot on. I am seeing this, Jimmy. I am seeing this come out of Children's Hospital. I'm seeing this big time come out of Children's Hospital and the way that they work with social services. This is absolutely job security. It's like when we talk about the homeless issue, quote issue, right? It's $1 billion industry. No one wants to. There are people that are committed to not solving homelessness because it is $1 billion industry. Jimmy, let me tell you, it is the same thing going on in these human services departments, in the foster care system, and all of these, money. I mean, big money is handed out. Big money is handed out to human services, to the foster care system, to these hospitals. It's another $1 billion industry, Jimmy, that people are committed to keeping alive. And this one is at the expense of children, separating children from their parents. It is legalized human trafficking going on in the United States of America, Jimmy. That's what this is.
Very strong words from Aurora City Councilwoman at large, Danielle Jurinsky. I want to shift gears because you have been a restaurant owner for some time. You own multiple restaurants in the Denver metro area, and there is this bill that's about to be proposed about this so-called Fair Workweek employment standards, which is all about predictability pay being doled out to workers sent home early due to slow business or other unforeseen circumstances. So among the components of the bill, it would require that affected employees or be told that their work schedule is presented 14 days in advance. Employees would have to be paid a full hour's wage for any time added to a shift and 2 full hours wages for any time subtracted from a shift. And overtime pay would be mandated for any hours an employee works within 12 hours of the last shift. Those are a few of the key provisions of this. As a restaurateur, a successful one, owner of several restaurants, what's your take on this proposed bill?
Well, Jimmy, to say that I'm shocked, right? what's going on in the state. I mean, it just proves how out of touch our legislators are. And it just proves, Jimmy, that people are just voting for who has the D next to their name. That's it. They're not researching these people. They're not. I mean, this is literally what's happening. And these legislatures, I see it all the time. I hear it. You know, remember, I serve with socialists on the Aurora City Council. Right. It always blows my mind when they start talking about minimum wage, when they start talking about things like this, and yet some of them don't even have jobs, much less have ever owned a business. I opened my first bar and restaurant at 24 years old, Jimmy. 24 years old. And I've worked to own multiple. And with this bill, listen, and especially in the service industry, this targets the service industry. And I want you to know, and all of your listeners, think back when you were in college, when you were bussing tables, when you were waiting tables, when you were bartending, whatever you were doing. Jimmy, I have employees that literally just show up some days. Hey, does anyone want to go home? I want to work. I want to pick up shift. Does anyone want to go home? I mean, that's a very real thing that happens in the service industry. So, you know, and if it is slow, I got the 21, 22-year-old bartenders, waitresses that are chomping at the bit. Hey, can I be first cut? Can I be cut first? I want to go to this party. I want to go downtown. I want to do this. So what does that mean now? That now I'm going to have to pay them for an extra hour when they're even asking to be cut early some nights? You know, I mean, Jimmy, it just further shows how we have no business people down at the state capitol. There's no business people. There's no business minds down at the state capitol. If this passes, Jimmy, I'm telling you, this could be the nail in the coffin for the service industry. I mean, this could be it. Never mind the fact that we're dealing with the egg shortages, right, in the food business.
Oh, expenses galore. I mean, and coming out of the pandemic, businesses were lucky to survive. Your companies were lucky to get through it. Now, I do want to ask one quick question. The idea of mandating that you put schedules out 14 days in advance. How practical is that in your industry?
It's not. It is not practical at all. It's not. Because you know how many times I get a phone call Monday morning, hey, this Friday night, it's my cousin's 50th birthday party. There's going to be 60 of us showing up. Oh, okay. I guess I need additional staff. Oh, but shucks. I already put the schedule out a week ago. So I guess my other staff is just going to get pummeled.
Yeah.
Well, you lose out on the business, or I guess you let it come in, and your other staff just gets pummeled.
Right.
Or at some point, me, the owner, right? Do I start working 100 hours a week myself? I have to just start picking everything up because I now have a law that mandates, that says I can't just call somebody in. I can't just I have to put the schedule out too. I mean, Jimmy, the people in the great state of Colorado have got to open their eyes, Our businesses are being killed.
Well, and Danielle Jurinsky, just one more thing that I know is that when you're, say, a sports bar owner, as you are, on Sundays and so forth, like that, you're not someone who's just like, oh, I own my restaurant and I'll just pop in and I'll do my thing, on occasion. You're frequently working yourself and helping out, especially on those very busy days. And so it's not like you or countless other small restaurant owners or owners of multiple restaurants or bars or what have you are not doing that exact same thing, because they are, especially when you are a self-owned business.
Well, and you talk about sports, Jimmy, that is a fantastic point. Let's talk about when it gets into the NBA championships. Let's talk about the Super Bowl, right? I don't know if, the Broncos, well, let's not use the Broncos. I don't know if the Avalanche are going to make it to the Stanley Cup, right? Until that very last game is played.
Yes.
Until someone, until someone wins to go to, I don't know until maybe 4 or 5 days, maybe a week tops before that the Avalanche are going to go to the Stanley Cup. And guess what? If they don't win that night, and my schedule's already out, then I have a whole bunch of people lined up to work, and there's not going to be the business for the Stanley Cup. Or I say, well, I don't know if the Avalanche are going to win, so I don't schedule a whole bunch of people, and we do win, and the sports bars are packed.
Right. And,
I mean, it's just,
and then you're violating the law suddenly because
the
Avalanche performed well? Oh, gosh, are we supposed to, by law, request that the Avalanche throw the games so that you guys, I don't know, it's ludicrous. Well, Danielle Jurinsky, you've been generous with your time. We really appreciate it this morning. And thanks for your insights on that, as well as the hard work that you are doing and others to expose what's happening with Child Protective Services in this state, because it really is important.
Of course. Thank you always, Jimmy.
All right. Thank you so much. Again, Aurora City Councilwoman at large, Danielle Jurinsky, joining us on the show. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, filling in for George Brauchler. We'll pick up the conversation. What are your thoughts? Give us a call, 303-696-1971. Text in on the 710 KNUS app on your smartphone as well. Don't go anywhere. It's Denver's local talk leader, News Talk 710 KNUS.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes, all in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today.
23 minutes before the top of the hour, 8:37. Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler here on News Talk 710 KNUS. Talking a variety of topics today, including this assault on Colorado's service economy. You heard some very strong words from Danielle Jurinsky, business owner of multiple restaurants. She made a great point. When you're, say, in the sports bar business, you have no idea how long teams are going to last. I mean, you can definitively say, okay, the Broncos have this schedule for their main season. Unless, say, the pandemic happens, and then they come back, and then they're like, okay, we got to modify these schedules based on, that makes it trickier. But generally speaking, you have the Broncos, you have the Avalanche, you have the Nuggets, the Mammoth, you name the team. They've got their main schedule. And then if they're in a league that has playoffs and a championship game and what have you, Super Bowl, or you have the Stanley Cup or what have you, then when you get to those playoffs, you don't know what's going to happen next. And so something great, especially when you're talking hockey, for example, spur of the moment, you could be like, okay, I need to be ready in a couple of days. But you needed to have a schedule in advance, 14 days, because of the rule like this or because of a law that could get passed? If you're listening, are you a manager of a restaurant? Have you been a manager of a restaurant? Are you a waiter or a waitress at a restaurant? A server, busser, chef? From your experience, is this practical? Is this a viable thing, or is this, as Jurinsky suggested, the potential end of the service industry in Colorado? Will it be a death nail for more businesses? Is it utterly impractical, or is it viable? Based on your experience, even as a patron of restaurants, what are your thoughts? 303-696-1971. The implications from your perspective and your own background and experience. We welcome that. 303-696-1971. Listener text. This bill will be the end of the tipped employees, and then people will be complaining about the service they won't be receiving. Bad for restaurants and customers. Be careful what you ask for. Yes, indeed. I mean, this is one of the important things that gets lost whenever government comes in and says, well, we know what's best and we want to have this new regulation and require that these businesses in this industry comply with X, Y, and Z. Because it doesn't take into account the potential consequences of what you're doing. It may be well-intentioned. I'm not going to question the intentions of those who are putting this forward. But as well-intentioned as it could be, what about the negative implications of this? What about the potential negatives? This is where, and I think it's not spoken about enough. I tried to bring it up. This idea of the seen and the unseen goes back to philosopher economist Frederick Bastiat, who was French, and back in the mid 1800s. And he talked about the seen and the unseen. The seen is, okay, you have something that takes place. So, for example, a window to one of these restaurants is busted by a vandal. Often has happened with the crime that we've seen, etc. And then you have to replace that window. And let's imagine a scenario where there's not insurance. In that case, insurance would be enough probably for a window, but maybe not. So this is a scenario where you have to pay out of pocket in your business to repair the window that the vandal busted up. Well, you might say the guy who's coming in to put the new window on, he's benefiting. That's a good thing. Okay. The glassmaker benefiting from making the window. That's a good thing. But what was the business owner, the restaurant owner, going to do with the money that he or she now has to spend on putting a new window up? Maybe they were going to be able to add extra shifts. Maybe they were going to bring on a new employee or get a new computer system, or they had a new menu item they were going to add in, but now they got to wait just a little bit longer because it's a little too expensive in that. That's the unseen. You see what the glass maker and the window repairman are getting, but you don't see what that money didn't go towards, that it was going to go towards. And the government can never really predict that. And it's exactly the kind of thing that we're seeing here. Oh, well, we want this to be addressed in this way. But what about the negative consequences? We have a numbers problem, text coming in. The only way we can win is with an overwhelming Republican turnout in voting, which isn't likely. That's true. But at the same time, business owners are Democrats too. Restaurant owners are Democrats too. Restaurant patrons are Democrats too, and they can feel and see the pinch. So it's a matter of everybody speaking up and speaking out about this. And that's exactly what needs to be done. Now, listeners were asking before who is responsible for putting this bill forward, and that is Denver Democratic Representative Emily Sirota, which makes perfect sense because she is far to the left. Emily Sirota is behind this monstrous bill. She needs to pull this bill. She is a Denver Democrat. What's your experience in the restaurant business? Your manager and employee? Feel free to call in 303-696-1971. Share your thoughts. Coming up at the top of the hour, we will talk about what might come up from the Federal Reserve. Yeah, a little bit of economics talk, but a great way to understand it is when you talk with a pro like Danielle DiMartino Booth, who will be joining us, former Fed official. She worked 9 years at the Dallas Federal Reserve and is author of a book called Fed Up. She's on Fox Business frequently talking about economic issues as well as many other places. And we'll get her expert insights coming up at the top of the hour. Lots to go on the show in the upcoming hour plus. Jimmy Sengenberger filling in for George Brauchler. You're listening to News Talk 710 KNUS, Denver's local talk leader. Good morning. Jimmy Sengenberger back with you. Filling in for George Brauchler this morning, News Talk 710 KNUS. Of course, I host the Jimmy Sengenberger Show every Saturday morning from 6 to 9. And I'll be in for Stephen Tubbs tomorrow afternoon from 4 until 7 here on Denver's local talk leader, News Talk 710 KNUS. Good to be with you as always. I wanted to make a comment, go back to earlier in the hour with Danielle Jurinsky, Aurora City Councilwoman at large, who, as we talked with her about, she has now been given a damages award of $3 million in her lawsuit against Robin Nicetta. She acknowledges the likelihood of getting much of anything back in that $3 million award is slim to none. But at the very least, it says a very important message. Nicetta weaponized her position at Child Protective Services to go after Jurinsky, falsely accusing Danielle of having, in graphic terms, sexually assaulted her child. And I mean, it's absolutely heart-wrenching, horrifying what happened. And when you have something like this take place, you have to push back. You have to take it to court. Thankfully, there will be legal, there's a criminal proceeding that's going on. But that message needs to be sent, and I'm glad that this happened. I mean, weaponizing a program like Child Protective Services is patently unacceptable, especially as retribution for, say, criticisms of your girlfriend. Nicetta's girlfriend at the time was then police chief of Aurora, Vanessa Wilson. And Danielle Jurinsky had strongly criticized publicly, including on this station, Wilson. Thought that Wilson needed to go. Was very open about that, and eventually Wilson was fired. Now, and rightly so, by the way. But this is crucial. It is unacceptable, and I'm disappointed as a Arapahoe County resident to see how ham-handedly, how slow, how inattentively Arapahoe County has been on this, including the commissioners. Deeply concerning. Listener text, Jimmy, how does one go about collecting on such a huge judgment? It really depends on circumstances. You won't be able to get that $3 million. Danielle will probably get a fraction, a small, tiny fraction of that amount. But it would potentially could come in through wage garnishment or other means. But that large sum ain't going to happen. She even acknowledged that in our interview. But that's not really the point. The point is the message that you're sending, and that $3 million in damages will be following Robin Nicetta for many years to come, the rest of her life, undoubtedly. But a message still needs to be sent. Now there's a federal lawsuit, $50 million, multiple families, not just Danielle Jurinsky, going after Arapahoe County Child Protective Services. And who knows how many other counties we are seeing this happen in, where CPS is being weaponized to take children away from their loving families. And it's disgraceful. It really is. And something needs to be done about it. And that's exactly what we are now seeing happen here. And it's good to see that. Because something has to be done, and you need to have folks speak out about it. Now, one more thing on the restaurant topic that we have been speaking about a lot. I mean, it's been a hot button, and rightly so. Emily Sirota, again, is the sponsor, Democrat from Denver, is behind this bill, the author of it. I really think that this shows how inconsiderate government often is. That they aren't considering what the repercussions are and even caring about that when you know what that will be. And that, to me, underscores why these people are a mess, why they're problematic, why we need less government. Listener text, concerning a bill to extract more waitstaff salary from the restaurants, it goes along with a liberal effort to raise the salaries of lower-paying service jobs. They feel every person should be guaranteed a living wage regardless of the work or the skill level. Absolutely. It's the same thinking as constantly trying to raise the minimum wage. It's a form of socialism where everybody gets what government considers a fair amount of money to live on. We need to reiterate, if you want a higher-paying career, you have to intentionally pursue one and do some future planning. Restaurant jobs were only meant to be temporary for some people, such as students or theater performers or people that don't need a high salary, need part-time or variable hours. Yes, and also no, especially when you get into the fine dining, higher-end restaurants. You can have a lot of career people, especially in management or restaurant owners or what have you. But managers, different kinds of positions, you can have wait staff that are at a restaurant for 10, 20 years and they're providing, or 30 years, and they're providing for their family off of that. So I will acknowledge that. However, when it comes to servers, so forth, like, yes, that is especially in the fast food industry, or say you're going to like a Red Robin or a Chili's or something, that tends to be a place where the people who are working there are younger people who are getting their first exposure to working. And you have to keep that in mind and in perspective. We're going to keep on the business and economic side of things. What in the world is the Federal Reserve looking at with this impending meeting? What could that mean for you and your bottom line when it comes to taking out loans, for example? We'll talk about interest rates, the Fed, and more with Danielle DiMartino Booth, a former Fed insider. Keep it right here, 710 KNUS. Where's the time gone? Fourth and final hour, Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler. 4 minutes after 9 o'clock. High of 31. Looks like the sun is out there, but it's supposed to be a foggier day today. Good to be with you, completing a trifecta as I filled in for both Deborah and Stefan yesterday, and now morning for George. And it's great to be with you once again on Denver's local talk leader, News Talk 710 KNUS. So interest rates have been on the rise. Meanwhile, inflation is still rising. You look at what's happening at the grocery store with gasoline. I've been seeing these prices go up, feeling the pain at the pump, feeling the pain at the grocery store. You're buying eggs, you're buying milk, chicken. So many different products have been rising, and there's a lot of concern about how this thing, even though inflation seems to be, according to the Consumer Price Index, sort of taming a little bit, it's still something, especially in particular industries, where we are seeing great difficulties for everyday Americans. And the Federal Reserve is on a quest to tame the skyrocketing cost of everything, to address this inflationary spiral that we have seen. And they will be deliberating very soon, January 31st through the 1st of February, at their next meeting of the Federal Open Market Committee to decide what comes next in setting their benchmark federal funds interest rate. Let's talk about this and get an understanding of what's going on and where we can go from here and the impact that this will have on everyday Americans with Danielle DiMartino Booth. She is the CEO and chief strategist for Quill Intelligence LLC, the author of the book Fed Up, an insider's take on why the Federal Reserve is bad for America. And for 9 years, she was at the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, serving as advisor to President Richard W. Fisher, and that includes throughout the financial crisis until his retirement in March of 2015. Danielle DiMartino Booth joins me now. Good morning, Danielle. It's good to talk with you again.
Good morning. It's great to be here.
So I want to start top line, because whenever you talk about the Federal Reserve, it can be a difficult topic for folks to kind of follow along with, because there are so many different intricacies. Let's just start at the basics. When we talk about inflation and the federal funds rate and sort of how the Fed works, what can you tell us top line about the functionality of that, what they mean?
Well, at the moment, Federal Reserve officials have been telling us that they're trying to prevent an inflationary spiral from being unleashed on the U.S. economy that would parallel that which we saw in the 70s and the 80s, which was really when inflation went wild. Many indicators, however, tell us that the U.S. economy has started to slow appreciably. We're seeing layoffs extend well beyond Silicon Valley into other industries. We're seeing industrial production slow down, retail sales slow down. But there are also millions of people who are no longer in the U.S. workforce. So there's this appearance that the labor force is tighter than it would be otherwise. And that is what's driving thinking among Federal Reserve officials, is that they don't want to stop fighting inflation, even though the economy is slowing. So markets are pricing in that the Federal Reserve is going to begin easing policy around the middle of the year, and yet Fed officials are telling us that that will not be the case, that they will maintain a higher level of interest rates, which of course curtails borrowing among households and businesses throughout 2023. So it's a second year, if you will, of the Federal Reserve saying, we're not going to listen to the financial markets and what they dictate we should be doing. We're going to follow our own metrics and make sure that we don't revisit sins of the past that were committed by people who didn't get the inflation genie back in the bottle.
So you're talking about the Fed wanting to sort of fight the market, go against what investors are saying. How practical is that, especially if you start seeing repercussions play out among investors, that maybe they make decisions that are going one way and the Fed is like, okay, this is a little bit concerning. I mean, how effective can they be at sort of fighting the market, Danielle?
Well, it's a very difficult task, and it comes down to, you were saying the Federal Open Market Committee meets next Tuesday and Wednesday. It really will come down to Federal Reserve officials convincing markets that they plan to remain steadfast in keeping policy tight, in maintaining high levels of interest rates, in shrinking the size of the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve, which is in and of itself another form of tightening. It really will come down to job owning.
So, job owning in what way?
In saying to markets, you want for something that we're not going to deliver on, so you should alter your pricing. And that really will be a case of whether or not they can convince markets that that they're not going to lower interest rates when the markets want for them to. Going into this meeting,
right?
You know, they've had a singular voice saying it's not going to be a large interest rate hike. It's not going to be 75, three-quarters of a percentage point, or even December's 50 basis points, a half a percentage point. We're going to take that down to 25 basis points, only a quarter of a percentage point, but we're going to maintain this tight level instead of allowing you markets to think that we're going to come riding to the rescue in the second half of the year. We don't want to be premature and presumptuous that we're going to be able to tackle inflation as quickly as the market anticipates.
When you say riding to the rescue, what does that mean? What would that mean?
So that is something that we characterize as the quote unquote Fed put. And that just means that in the past 40 years, investors have grown accustomed to the Fed bailing out the market. So loosening policy, lowering interest rates back down to zero. And so that the stock market can fully rebound, and housing and autos, interest rate sensitive sectors, are not impaired for longer than they would be otherwise.
Danielle DiMartino Booth is our guest. For 9 years, she was at the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. So traditionally what you see is that when the economy goes into recession or otherwise has an economic downturn that we experience, then the Federal Reserve will tend to reduce interest rates. And that's when you say riding in on the horse, sort of saving the day, so to speak, that's the traditional mode of action for the Fed. And so investors would like to see that. It can help the economy, but that would potentially run against their objective of reducing inflation or holding the line on inflation, right?
Yes, and I think the way you characterize it is best, holding the line on inflation, making sure that being too early in halting this battle against inflation such that it comes roaring back. And then they've got to go again and tighten again and launch a whole new cycle. They're saying rather than do that, we're just going to try and hold the line for longer.
You and I both know that when it comes to economic policy, there is a difference between what you intend to do, what your plan is, and what you will actually do. When it comes to the Fed, talk a little bit about that, the idea of what they intend to do, what their goal might be for this year, versus how it might actually pan out, especially if we do start to see all the signs point very clearly and indisputably toward recession.
Well, that makes for a very tricky situation. It also makes Federal Reserve policy, it becomes a political football at that point. So you'll have people in Congress, the White House saying the Fed is going too far. They're forcing the U.S. economy into recession, knowingly doing so by not lowering interest rates. And that is when the independence of the Fed is tested. If they have to push back against such forces that are coming out of Washington, D.C., and that is indeed a very real possibility, especially as the country and the rest of the world becomes increasingly nervous about this debt ceiling showdown.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask about that too, because when it comes to the debt ceiling, I mean, I'm not concerned about that, but certainly markets could be at some point, especially as we get closer toward the summer, if there isn't an agreement in Congress. At this time, when you have concerns about Federal Reserve policy and you also have concerns about Congress and the debt ceiling, how do those maybe go together? Could the debt ceiling debacle, potential debacle, influence what the Fed ends up doing? What are your thoughts on how those things may go together and how investors view it?
Well, there's a certain irony here, and that is because Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has had to impose what we call emergency measures to prevent the U.S. government from shutting down. The simplest way I can put it is that the United States has a checking account, just like any of us have a checking account. Normally, they would have to maintain, the Treasury would have to normally maintain a minimum balance in this checking account. But with emergency measures imposed by Treasury Secretary Yellen, the Treasury is legally allowed now to run that balance down. And that actually ends up injecting liquidity into the economy, which thereby offsets the effects of the Federal Reserve's quantitative tightening. So it actually initially helps out the Federal Reserve. But once there is an agreement, whether it be potentially out to August or October, we heard yesterday. So God forbid we're actually still talking about this 6 months from now. After that time, though, the U.S. Treasury, after the resolution, would have to sell quite a bit of Treasury bills to bring that checking account balance of Uncle Sam's back up to the requisite level. At the same time, the Fed will continue to shrink its balance sheet potentially, which means that there will be double liquidity being pulled from the system. It'll feel like a boomerang effect in the economy. And that's why the role that the Federal Reserve is playing is so critical. But again, the irony is that the liquidity the Federal Reserve is pulling out by allowing treasuries to mature off of its balance sheet is going to be offset temporarily while the Treasury runs down its checking account balance to inject funds into the economy to keep the government and essential services up and running.
What would be the potential impact, Danielle DiMartino Booth, of throwing out more liquidity into the market? All this cash, that's really what you're talking about, is much more in terms of liquid assets and cash back out into the economy vis-a-vis inflation.
Well, that's the thing, right? If the federal government is going to be spending this money that it otherwise would not have been had there been an early and amicable resolution to the debt ceiling, again, I keep coming back to the word irony. It will end up offsetting the moves by the Federal Reserve to deplete economy by $60 to $95 billion a month by shrinking its balance sheet. So the Treasury's actions effectively neutralize tightening of the Federal Reserve, but for a time only. And then you approach the point where Uncle Sam cannot legally have an overdrawn balance. The implication is that the U.S. would default on its debt, that's DEFCON 1. That's the impossible, at which point that there will be a resolution of some kind, even if there are spending cuts that come with it, which the hardliners in the Republican Party are demanding. And again, that would not put the country in a good place. Google 2011 debt ceiling standoff, and you see that there was a very detrimental effect on the stock market, on the bond market, on hiring in America. So it put the economy in a very precarious place. And we certainly don't want to go there again, but we do have a blueprint of what it looks like and what the fallout would be.
So you believe that the consequences of not resolving the debt ceiling issue in fairly short order could really be dramatic?
Well, it certainly could be. And we have seen this before. And that is why you have the White House coming out preemptively and saying, we are absolutely not going to negotiate. We're not going to be cutting the services that are being demanded to be cut. In 2011, S&P, Standard & Poor's, downgraded the sovereign debt of the United States because there was no commitment to curtail entitlement spending that is becoming debilitating to carry for the United States, whether it's Social Security or Medicare reforms. Look at what's happening in France. There are riots in the streets, because between now and 2030, the government of France wants to increase the retirement age from the age of 62 to 64 in the space of the next 7 years. We would see similar types of proposals coming from the Republicans, such that we can reduce the amount of entitlement spending going out further into the future, and kind of buttressing the balance sheet future obligations of the United States.
So is it, on the other hand, though, Danielle DiMartino Booth, our guest, isn't this shouldn't this be more of a wake-up call? I mean, we see this consistently where you have these kinds of fights, especially when you have a Republican Congress or even just one house of Congress, as we see right now, and a Democratic president. But this is seems like kicking the can down the road. If Congress just accepts the debt ceiling and says, okay, we're going to raise it and we're not going to have any sort of concerns here, at some point, don't you have to pay the piper? At some point, don't we have to either experience the consequences of not addressing the fiscal cliff that we've got right now, or we need to address this situation? It's concerning to me where we have this sort of life or death scenario. We have to extend the debt limit right away, or else we will have this disaster. But meanwhile, we have all these issues that you're talking about that are festering, and the politicians are unwilling to actually take actions to address those long-term issues.
Look, this has been an issue for the United States for multiple decades. And the credit standing of the United States is increasingly impaired because we will not go head on and face these challenges and address our future spending. A corporation would never be allowed to operate this way. You would never have a board of directors say, oh, okay, you can have as much cash as you want. We can run up as much debt as you want.
Right.
No, the bond market would punish any kind of a company that acted so recklessly. And yet we assume that the Congress of the United States and the White House can play by a different set of rules. That might be okay if the United States was the only economy on the planet, but we still depend for at least a quarter of our treasuries for foreigners to step up and buy at auction, at treasury auctions. And that presumption should not necessarily be a given if we refuse to enact reforms and get our fiscal house in better order for future generations of Americans to not be so loaded down with $31 trillion and counting of U.S. debt.
Yeah, and so there could be a calculus among some Republicans in Congress that we're seeing in the House that are, especially those that are willing to hold the line on their fiscal positions. They could say, okay, we may have some potential negative repercussions to the market and to other things as a result of waiting longer to reach a deal on the debt limit, but it's for the greater good because we have to address some of these concerns that you and I are discussing right now. I mean, I don't know how long that calculus lasts. This is DC, and normally the politicians don't want to wait and deal with the immediate political fallout that can come from that. But at the same time, we may see something a little bit different in Congress than we normally do, based on, for example, what we saw with the Speaker of the House vote.
We will. And I'll take the devil's advocate position on McCarthy. Yes, it took 15 votes. I understand that. But boy, did we see a patient man. He just methodically went from one vote to another after another and waited it out and showed that he had the fortitude to simply wait. And waiting can be very expensive when you feel like a time bomb is ticking in the background. And again, these are reforms that will at some point have to be made, especially as the months go by. And if the Federal Reserve sticks to its guns, does not lower interest rates, possibly just raises them to a certain level and keeps them there, well, then the interest expense of the United States is going to become very problematic this year in 2023, as even Treasury bill sales are going to be done at a much higher interest rate.
Final question for you, Danielle DiMartino Booth, and really appreciate your time this morning. Again, Danielle spent 9 years at the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, so we appreciate your insights. what should we be watching for in the coming couple of weeks, both leading up to the Fed's meeting next week, next Tuesday and Wednesday, and following that, especially given that as we talked about before, there may be a difference between what they say they want to do and what they actually do?
So I think every public presentation by Fed Chair Jay Powell is going to be extremely important to listen to, as well as some of his closest lieutenants. Follow me on Twitter at DiMartino Booth. You'll find out exactly who those individuals are. If they stay as a cohesive unit and indicate that we are going to continue going into the summer, at the March FOMC meeting, at the June meeting as well, and then maintain higher interest rates, that will have an effect on companies, and you will start to see more and more layoff announcements that are harmful to the real economy. Ask any state comptroller. Right now, state tax revenues really have begun to disappoint on the downside. There's no other stimulus that's going to come to the rescue. And by the way, reignite inflation with it. We should not anticipate the things that we saw after the pandemic coming out of Washington, D.C. If we can't even resolve the debt ceiling, they're certainly not going to be writing huge checks to ignite inflation.
Well, we will be watching with great interest, that's for sure. Danielle DiMartino Booth, CEO and Chief Strategist for Quill Intelligence LLC, author of the book Fed Up, an Insider's Take on Why the Federal Reserve is Bad for America. Thank you so much for joining us, breaking this down. Well done and appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Once again, Danielle DiMartino Booth joining us here on the George Brauchler Show. Jimmy Sengenberger filling in for George this morning. We are going to take a quick break. When we come back, some thoughts on that and more. What are your calls? What are your thoughts on anything that we've talked about today? We'll have open lines for the rest of the show at 303-696-1971. Keep it right here. You're listening to Denver's local talk leader, News Talk 710 KNUS. Welcome back. Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler. The time has just been flying by. Bottom line from that conversation with Danielle DiMartino Booth, you have really two choices on the debt ceiling discussion. One, is it time to pay the piper and address the fiscal cliff that we've got? The economic crises that could come down the line because of the national debt? Is it, will Congress finally act? Or will they take the easier route politically in the short term, one that will also help out the Federal Reserve when it comes to what markets would like, what you might like, which is to reduce interest rates once we hit clearly into a recession? I believe we've been in a recessionary space for a while, but we don't have that same gusto of a recession that we have in the past, and that is about to change. And so you would want the Fed to reduce interest rates, theoretically, to make borrowing easier and help cushion a recession. That's the idea. That's a lot of what Danielle was talking about, from why markets would like to see that shift in the Fed policy. But, you know, when you look at the national debt, you look at the debt ceiling, there are a lot of issues that come up. It gets complicated. But it's important to understand just a little bit what's happening when it comes to these bigger economic issues. And so I appreciate Danielle DiMartino Booth joining us in the last segment. 303-696-1971, our telephone number. Let's go to Bill in Parker. Good morning, Bill. How are you?
Good morning, Jimmy. Fine, thank you. Yourself?
I'm doing good. What's up?
No, I just wanted to talk about this whole thing about minimum wages and worker type legislation or policies. Sure. You know, when someone offers a job if worked full time, 40 hours, does not allow that person to survive at some low but realistic level in that community, I would say that's not a job. It's a joke masquerading as a job. And they've been able to get someone to fill it, someone who's doesn't have their wits about them, doesn't have any confidence, or is just devoid of options. But to get someone to work where I, as the taxpayer, have to now come up with Section 8 support, earned income tax credit support, Medicaid, these fuel assistance things, as a taxpayer, I'm just supporting their business at that point, because they've gotten someone to take the bait and take a so-called job that doesn't do what a job has to do.
So, Bill, I think you're making a conclusion that I don't know is fair to make. Drawing the conclusion almost that most businesses are fleecing their employees, particularly in the restaurant industry. And let's be clear that really there are two classes of workers in the restaurant industry. One, that is the long-term tenured employees who have are career restaurateurs, and they may be, especially on the management side, or maybe lifelong service. You do have that. And that often you will find in higher end, finer dining kinds of restaurants. But when you're talking at a lot of the fast food restaurants, you go to a coffee shop or you go to a number of other places, what you are seeing is people who are doing their jobs for the first time, or they are in college, or maybe they are out of college. And one of the problems is that they studied something they shouldn't have probably in college. And so they got a master's in whatever, and they're working at Starbucks, and then they're finding themselves in a prickly situation that has nothing to do with Starbucks, but has more to do with the fact that they decided to pursue a degree and even a master's degree and rack up all this debt. And then they can't find a job that is commensurate with those skills. Excuse me, I think that you are respectfully drawing a conclusion that is a lot more complicated than simplistic.
Yeah, I'm aware that there's a lot of reasons why people end up in low-paying jobs. But what I'm saying is if Starbucks going to, I guess most businesses are going to pay the least they can for the most part. They're not going to gratuitously just pay more than they feel they have to. So if you've got a low-skilled job and you've got a lot of people that could do that job, you can certainly leverage that advantage. But what I'm saying is you are the people that are doing that. Now, not the high-end restaurants, not these other manufacturing type jobs or whatever. You are, in effect, leaning on the taxpayer to fill the gap. And I'm just saying, no, if your business does not produce right here in Parker, McDonald's is paying $19 an hour. So let's say that's
a good
you
wage
can live in Parker
for that kind of work.
Yeah, right. Starting. Yep. It's right on it's a big sign right on the door. Okay. Big sign right on the door. And that's not an assistant manager or anything. That's just somebody behind the counter.
Right.
You can probably live on that in Parker as a single person. You're not going to live well, but you can probably make the nut. But the fact that if they felt that they could get away with paying the minimum wage, that person would then have to get Section 8, would have to get Medicaid, would have to get aid to dependent children or earned income tax credits, which the taxpayer, would be bridging the gap between that person living in their car.
Hold on, though, Bill. I mean, if you're talking in that kind of a situation, $19 per hour for a starting wage for McDonald's, you can't expect the business of McDonald's is supposed to say, oh, come on over and we will cover all of your costs. We will pay you what do you have to do at that point? $30 to be satisfactory in that way, or whatever amount it is. You can't expect that McDonald's is going to just say, oh, start on over here and we are going to cover all these costs so that you don't end up on welfare because you're not doing maybe the other things that you need to do personally. I don't think you should just be putting this on the business.
Jimmy, I was giving that as an example of a wage, the bottom wage that probably would allow a person to live in the community, at least based on other, market rents and things like that. I wasn't saying that it should be higher than that, but the state minimum wage is $15 an hour. It's obsolete in many parts of the state, and the federal wage is in the $7 range, which is a complete joke, maybe except in Mississippi or something. So to me, it would make sense to have, if you're going to have a minimum wage, have one that's based on the median wage, and it's based on the local median wage, the region, within the zip code or within, something around the zip code. It makes no sense to have a minimum wage.
So that's fair enough. But when you're determining median wage, that is actually you do also have to wonder, okay, how are those numbers calculated? What are you actually putting in as far as the inputs, the kind of jobs? Is it industry dependent? Right. Is it just general? This is one of the reasons why I think that would be risky, and why I'm not necessarily in favor of minimum wage in general, because you have so many different factors where industries can be wildly different in terms of what's practical or what those positions are worth. Somebody who's starting at McDonald's probably isn't worth too much relative to what that company has to pay out as far as other expenses, as far as what they're able to bring in for trying to keep their meals as cheap as possible, so on and so forth. But here's what I do want to say, though, Bill. I appreciate you calling in and lending in some nuance to this discussion, because we don't often have this. We don't have the considerations of, okay, what is the pay there? What's practical for a business? What's practical to live on? So on and so forth.
Right. What I was proposing was, if you had a local-based minimum wage, so it would be based on, say, your zip code and any zip code that touches your zip code. So you have all these little circles of zip codes, right? And you have a median wage there that is calculated. You can argue all day about how you calculate these statistics, but it is calculated that's probably somewhat meaningful and accurate. And if you have it spread out among several zip codes, you're not going to have the domination of just one thing. If you use Greenwich, Connecticut, everybody isn't a hedge fund manager, right? But if you spread it out around Greenwich, Connecticut, you start to get an average that becomes meaningful. Okay. And to me, that if you're going to work in that area, then you've got to be able to live somewhere near that area. And if you're going to live somewhere near that area, you've got to have a wage that allows that. So I'm just saying, if your business depends on people not being able to connect the endpoints, then that's a problem.
Well,
and it winds up landing in the taxpayer's lap.
I think, though, Bill, that the trends have been, and not just because of increases in minimum wage, but the trends have been naturally in a higher direction as far as those wages. I mean, and you look under the Trump administration, we saw the greatest gains that were going on in wage increases was among the bottom quartile of people, which was very encouraging. So you are seeing some of those natural pressures, but at the same time, if you jack up the minimum wage too much, if the cost becomes so much, when you got food costs, you got transportation costs, and you've got added employee costs, we have seen at different kinds of stores and different kinds of restaurants the increasing use of kiosks and so forth to automate those kinds of positions, which doesn't help anybody because then you got people who are out of work. Final thought.
Right. Capitalism is very dynamic and will respond to changes in the environment. That's the beauty of capitalism. But if your business model depends on other people having to live in their parents' basement or live in their car or live,
I don't know many
in a one-bedroom apartment, then your business model is not valid. And if you go away, that's probably okay.
Well, you know what? I think yes, and that's sort of the creative destruction of capitalism,
Yes.
as they say. And but I don't think there are very many businesses who are doing what you described, Bill. But you know what? Excellent call. I really appreciate the exchange. Thank you, sir, and have a great day.
Okay, you too.
All right, 303-696-1971. We're going to take a quick break. On the other side, Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brauchler. We'll pick up more of your calls and texts. Stephen, stay on the line. We want to hear about your experience in the restaurant industry. Keep it right here. Denver's local talk leader, News Talk 710 KNUS.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes. All in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today.
We're under that time pressure now, coming up to the end of the show. Boy, have these 4 hours flown by. Jimmy Sengenberger filling in today for George Brauchler, News Talk 710 KNUS. We've been talking about this bill that has been proposed or is about to be proposed in the Colorado State Legislature by Denver Democrat State Rep Emily Sirota on predictability pay for the service industry, and it would be utterly disastrous. And it's really driven home a lot of different issues and points of discussions. And by the way, one text that came in, you'd think before they submit a bill, they discuss it with the industry it affects. Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be nice? Stephen, right here in Colorado, has been waiting patiently. Want to go to him here on the program as our final call of the day. Good morning, Stephen. How are you?
I am good, sir. How are you today?
I'm doing just fine. What's on your mind?
Well, I've been in the industry for 30 years, and coming through the pandemic and watching these new legislative bills coming through written by morons that have never actually worked in the industry, it's killing the restaurant industry. And again, they have not consulted the restaurant, business whatsoever. But I can tell you what is truly happening is, we in the industry are starting to look at the model, which is, you have the front of the house, back of the house type of individuals, whereas you have servers and bartenders making $400, $500, $600 a shift. They work 5 shifts, 4 shifts a week. Back of the house, those guys not only are working 5 shifts at my location, 4 shifts at another location, filling in the blank with a third job. All right, because those guys are making $19 an hour. That's what our industry can support. What we will start looking at is not only sharing tips. Mercantile downtown, which is in Union Station, they do a very good job of that, where the servers and back of the house, they are all part of the pool. But we're also looking at eliminating that position as far as server as well, whereas more of a pub style service where you go to the bar to order a drink, you go to the bar to order your food, you have someone that will bring out your food, but they're not going to be there to service you as far as water, drinks. Eliminating those positions, not only to save us on the payroll taxes, but it just is, the numbers just keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller in a business that already is making razor thin margin.
Well, let me ask a question, because obviously we had a listener in the last segment who was talking about businesses and restaurants in particular that aren't paying their employees enough, or they end up having to go into welfare programs or Section 8 housing or whatever. I think that, there are instances where people are able to get jobs in the current makeup of the restaurant industry, that if you continue down this path the government is leading, and other factors, let's be clear, there are a variety of factors contributing to the constraints on the growth of the restaurant businesses and the ability to maintain the positions that you have. But as you have more of those government pressures, then those people who may be lower skilled and lower level positions at these restaurants could end up finding themselves no longer working there in the first place, and then they are completely out of a job altogether.
Yeah, that is very, very true. You take a server at a Buffalo Wild Wings or a cook at a Buffalo Wild Wings. I'm using them as an example because it's, we all know it. It's burgers, beer, and chicken wings.
Yep.
Very, very low skilled. McDonald's is another one. But however, Buffalo Wild Wings, that's again a tipped industry where McDonald's is not. McDonald's, they're going to have to figure out their business model, and they are. They are eliminating the front counter servers, right? So those jobs are going away. You keep down this path, you're going to start eliminating these jobs, and these people will not have an introduction to learning how to work, showing up on time, doing the job that they were tasked to doing. That skill is going away.
Right.
And the government is killing it. We sit here and we scratch our heads going, is anyone asking us what these numbers really are going to reflect on our bottom line? No, they're not. They are not asking us. They're not asking us, and they've never done it before. It's infuriating that you sit there and try to run a business, and then you get these little guys just kind of, you got to pay your taxes.
Right.
Yes, we all do.
Well, yeah, you have it's contemptuous and it's presumptuous on the part of those legislators, especially those who may not have experience at all in the industry or may not have any interest in speaking. And that's pretty clear here, speaking with the industry. Although when you're talking about that kind of experience, aren't there other industries that provide similar experience? I mean, you have the restaurant industry, you got retail, though, grocery stores, working at a mall, things like that at least do provide other opportunities.
That is very, very true. However, are those individuals going to be tipped, right?
Right.
So you can say flexibility. If you're going to go into, say, a retail environment, there's not truly a lot of flexibility there, So it's not as truly flexible. And if you want to talk about someone that can go in there, again, do 5 shifts a week and make a living wage as a server, bartender, you can do that in a relatively short period of time. It takes a lot of skill to get to a level from working at, say, a Walmart or something like that.
Right.
Yes, you can get a good wage there. Costco is a very good example of who pays a very good living wage with benefits in that industry. Does that translate into somebody that's going to go into work in Macy's at their higher end, say, women's department? Those women are very skilled at what they do. I don't know what their living wages are, but I would guess with someone that has that type of skill set,
all right,
that doesn't translate from someone from Costco. You know what I'm saying?
Sure. Well, Stephen, hey, excellent call. I appreciate it. I got to run. I have a final thought before the end of the show, but I appreciate you joining us this morning. Thanks for your insights.
Very good, sir. You have a good afternoon.
Thank you. You as well. It does feel like it's been up all these hours. It does feel like, doesn't it, Billy? Feel like it should be the afternoon already, not just coming upon 10 a.m. A couple more listener texts. This is for restaurants only, but years out, it'll be for everybody that has a business in the state of Colorado. You could see exactly that come about. That's for sure. Start with the service economy and then grow from there into other relevant industries or things similar to what this Sirota bill would do. A couple of listeners, I appreciate the text noting a great show and that you enjoyed it. I'm glad for that. I will be in for Stephen Tubbs tomorrow night from 4 to 7 right here on News Talk 710 KNUS. I believe I will be joined by my good friend, Associate Professor of Communication at Regis University, Dr. Rob Margison. I'm hoping he'll be joining me tomorrow. We've got much to discuss, including what's happening in Florida with Governor Ron DeSantis in schools there with the AP African American Studies course, and what's happening with AI, artificial intelligence, and the impact that could have on academia. Lots happening. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. Tune in Saturday as well. Caldera's in tomorrow for George. Have a great week. God bless America.